Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, who is just, on his way back across the bridge with some delicious fried chicken. It's Matt Freeman. Matt, how's that walk going?
It's delicious.
I'm so interested by the fact that what you glommed on that introduction was that the chicken was good, not that you were about to be run over by a car.
It's so good. Have you ever had just a really good bucket of fried chicken?
I have.
It's finger licking good.
Yeah.
It's worth being crushed against the rails of a bridge.
Hey, before we get started today, I just wanted to point something out that my wife pointed out to me last week. So you know how sometimes people ask us questions about previous episodes and we answer, I don't remember saying that at all. It was multiple episodes ago. How can you expect me to remember things that happened multiple episodes ago? Well, my wife pointed out to me that the joke that we made at the beginning of last week's episode, where I'm a quarter Irish, we did that same joke already at the end of the episode before it. The same joke.
Well, maybe those people forgot in the intervening week. So
no, impossible. And people going through the podcast years from now will notice this and be like, are they stupid? And the answer is yes, we are very stupid.
That's part of the charm, I understand.
I mean, that's why we're called Doof Media, is because we're stupid, but we're pretending to be smart. And that's how we get ahead in life.
We're stupid pretending to be smart, pretending to be stupid.
Oh, that's like...
So
how many dimensions of chess is that? It's a lot.
At least one.
All right, let's do the show now. This week on the show, it's the beginning of the end, as we start our final novel of the Kingslinger saga. Can you believe it, Matt? It's here somehow already. I can't believe it. It's been 5 years, and yet it feels like it's flown by. But we're here. This is the last book. This is it.
I'm so full of emotions. I'm excited to be covering a book that you haven't read yet.
Yeah.
I have no idea how this conversation is going to go. I expect it'll just go completely off the rails because the structure that we operate within is gone.
I think what's going to happen is I'm going to ask you a very pointed question and then you're going to respond. And then I'm going to forget that I don't know if your and is correct or not. And then I'm supposed to respond back with an opinion of my own. And so I think that's how it's going to work. We're going to finish the episodes, but what does Scott think about the book? I don't know. But yes, this week we begin our final book. For the next 8 episodes, we're going to be taking a look at our pick for the 2020s, the most recent decade. And by the way, the 6th decade that Stephen King has been writing novels in, which just sounds ridiculous, but is somehow true. We'll be chatting all about 2022's fairy tale. This week, we're going to be covering just the first 5 chapters of the novel. And Matt, before we get into it, how you feeling? How you feeling 5 chapters in? This is, as you said, a book that neither of us have read before. Are you liking it so far?
I'm enjoying it. I know nothing about this book going into it, which I know you know a little bit more than me, but not that much either. But it's funny because my preconceptions of this book, based on the literal cover, were that it was going to be sort of, and the fact that it's called fairy tale is that it was going to be sort of a fantasy, and we may go that way, right? This may be a sort of portal story where he goes through into the other realm. But so far, I'm just okay, what kind of story are we in exactly? I'm not asking that question in a bad way. It's not like I'm impatient for the book to tell me where we're going, but I am kind of okay, what is this story exactly? What are we doing here? What do you think?
Yeah,
What do you feel?
I feel the exact same way. I know this is a fairy tale by its title, and I think it's a fairy tale in both the perhaps the Disney definition of such, and also perhaps the Tolkienian definition of what a fairy story is. And so I am expecting some sort of threshold cross. I am expecting some sort of journey to a magical land. I think there are things in these 5 chapters that seem to indicate we could possibly be going that way. But I do think one of the most interesting things to me was that we didn't get there in these first 100 pages. Where I think we're on page like 85, 86, somewhere around there. So I didn't know how quickly this book was going to roll, but I was a little bit surprised, and not badly, that it is taking its time as much as it is. It even feels like, we end this week, we end chapter 5 basically with the idea that our two characters are going to have a conversation very, very soon that will answer some of the mysteries of this mysterious house and the old man that lives there, but that the shed, which is like the focal point of everything that's supposed to kick off the story, comes even after that. So like I don't have a really good solid foundation theory that we're even going to head to the world of fairy next week. Like it could
Right.
be beyond that. So I mean, that is interesting. I do appreciate that it's rolling this out as slow as it is, because we do get a lot of time with these characters, and I'm already kind of in love with these characters, especially the dog. But yeah, I am with you in that I am very unclear as of right now where this is going. We'll try to make
Yeah.
some educated guesses throughout the course of the episode, but yeah.
And a lot of our material stakes are pretty firmly grounded in the mundane. We care
Yeah.
about his dad, his relationship with his dad. We care about the old man. We care about, is he going to get into college? Like we're being planted firmly here, in contrast to something like 11/22/63, a book I might bring up here and there,
Yeah.
where we kind of got to the time travel conceit pretty quickly. Not that we spent no time establishing Jake as a character, but I think we spent relatively less. That's my recollection. What's funny is I could be wrong.
Yeah.
That's my recollection.
Or even something like the Talisman, which I think did take a
Mhm.
long time before we got to the other world in the Talisman. But I feel like the stakes of the novel were established to where like right now, I don't know why Charlie would need to be a hero going on a hero's adventure into another world, would need to step across that threshold, would need to move into the realm of the fairy. Whereas Travel and Jack, that was like the opening beats of the story, right? Was his mother is in danger, his mother's dying, and this is a quest to save his mom. Like even before we entered into that other world, like those beats were clearly established, or at least we were somewhat aware of them. We'll see. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen here. Is it going to be a Narnia esque stumble into the other world, or is it going to be a like a pointed, we need to go to this place to do this thing journey? I don't know. I think there might be some clues in some of the references that King makes throughout this, but yeah, we just don't know yet, and that's
Yeah.
exciting. It's fun. Matt, I'm really loving this. It's like the fact that I'm getting to read a new King book and talk about it simultaneously is a thing that has not happened to me in 5 years. So I'm pretty excited about this.
Yeah, that's good of you to point that out. Didn't I didn't really think about the fact that this is like, in some sense, this is what you were building to the whole time.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. All right, let's get into it. Before we talk about fairy tale specifically, I did want to just briefly talk about the 2020s, like we've done with some of the other King decades. At the time of this recording, which is September of 2024, for those of you listening in the far off land of the future, the 2020s are not even half over. So if we read this list of King's output for the decade and it seems a little bit smaller than the previous ones, that's why. It's not because he's old. It's just because we've only done 5 years in the decade so far. Also, a weird thing to think about that I didn't actually put in my head until I started putting the script together. Every single book that takes place in this decade is a book that came out after we started this podcast, which is wild to think about. Everything that we've covered up until this point has been a thing that took place in the past, that this is a book that had been released and come out and made its impact on pop culture and the world, and then we were after the fact taking a look at it. And these, like, we were talking about the Gunslinger when some of these books started coming out. When this book came out, it's 2022. I don't even know, we were, I think, on to season 2 already.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember all these books coming out and being like, oh, maybe we'll read that one at the end of the show, because it's a book that came out after he started the show, and then another one would come out. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Good.
It also presents us with this wonderful opportunity to check and see if Steve is surreptitiously listening to our podcast and putting little hints and comments, or maybe even fixes to his writing that we've so generously offered him over these past 5 years, right? He's definitely doing that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel pretty sure of that, right?
I would be
Oh,
pretty upset if he didn't. Like, we're offering him this free advice and he's just not taking it. It's rude.
I mean, everyone
Really.
knows that that's why we do the podcast, is
Yeah.
because we want to change the way that he writes and make him different than
Yeah.
the way he is.
Yeah. Here's how he could be better, and
Mhm.
do it.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy though how he is just not slowing down at all, right? Like
Not at
just
all. Not at all.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those that don't know, the 2020s so far sees us with 5 novels. There is Later and Billy Summers that both came out in 2021, a partnership with Richard Chismar to conclude the Gwendy trilogy that came out in 2024. I believe it's Gwendy's Final Task. Holly, of course, came out last year in 2023. And of course, Fairy Tale back in 22. Also, Matt, 2 more short story collections are released this decade. If It Bleeds came out back in 2020, and most recently, You Like It Darker just a few months ago in 2024. So, yeah, like you said, like that we're only in 24, and yet that's a lot of books to be released. That's more output than some authors do their entire lives, and it's in a decade 6, and only halfway through the decade.
Yeah, just utterly baffling. As someone who tries to write from time to time, it's just like I don't know. I got nothing to even say. It's not even the same species. He's a
Yeah,
different type
yeah,
of person.
yeah. All right. It's one thing that is tough though. One thing that I've tried to do with you throughout all these decades is like look at the decade holistically and be like, all right, what's like the theme of this decade? What is Stephen King trying to do in this arbitrary 10-year period we've selected? It's harder to do in this one, Matt. And maybe it's because we're only halfway through the decade. Maybe when we're in 2030, we'll be looking back and see, like, oh, it's very clear this is what the 2020s were all about. But right now, I'm not so sure, right? There are 2 Holly books. There's Holly, and then If It Bleeds, which is a short story within that short story collection. I guess the thing is to say that there's not been like what I guess you would call like a traditional horror novel in this year yet. I mean, it's not that some of these stories don't have horror elements in it. I think Holly does. I also think the collection You Like It Darker has a lot of just straight out horror short stories, but not like a horror novel. Like Later and Billy Summers are closer to, I guess, what you'd call thrillers. Although, frankly, when I start saying that, I'm like, well, what does that mean? Where's the line we're drawing between a thriller and a horror in this arbitrary genres? But um, I think the one connecting thing, the one thing we can talk about at least here, is the thing that dominated the early 2020s for everyone in the world, which was the existence of this global pandemic we had, right? And
Mhm.
this is a book that takes place before that. It takes place in 2013, so there is no mention of COVID. But I can say without spoiling anything, the books that came out after this, Matt, mention it very, very directly, and perhaps this will mention it, metaphorically. I don't know. We'll see. But I think it has to be something that's on my mind, because I think if I've got my timing right, this book was written during the lockdown. Like this
Mm.
was the one he was working on in 2020, and probably a little bit of 2021 when the world was shut down. And that feels like it would have a significant impact on the story, what it's doing and what he wants to do and what he's thinking about.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So basically, thematically, something about isolation or maybe some connection back to his other pandemic novel, possibly
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
I wouldn't be entirely surprised to see. Um, yeah, who knows though? I don't know. So far, not really detecting it. Not
Yeah.
really detecting the idea of really anything adjacent to that. But yeah,
No,
that's a good thing to keep our mind on.
the only thing I could think about was with Mr. Bowditch and his dog and the relationship between the two of them. One of the things I was thinking about possibly was, oh, I bet like King is spending a lot of time with his dog. Like
Mhm.
I think that's something all of us pet owners experienced when this whole thing happened, and I know you don't have pets, but you have children, and they were stuck at home, so it's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I like this idea that this growing appreciation for and examination of the relationship between a person and their dog, I think, is front and center in this book very early. And so again, I don't know if that specifically King was like typing away and like looking at his dog Molly and thinking about their relationship and how they've been hanging out a lot more recently because he's not doing any trips or any speaking arrangement, anything. He's just stuck at home. I don't know, but that did occur to me.
Yeah, just coming to appreciate the role of this other person, this furry person who lives in his home. Yeah,
Yeah,
makes
yeah.
sense.
All right. So as for Fairy Tale itself, well, honestly, Matt, the reason why I picked this one for the decade was for the reason you already said. It's the final novel of our show, and I thought it'd be fun to pick a book that I hadn't read before. And when we were putting the schedule for season 3 together, I hadn't gotten to this one yet, and so I said, "Hey, that'll be fun. I just won't read it, and then we'll both get to read it together." But I think beyond that, like from a thematic perspective, we don't know this book, but we do know its title. We know it's a book about, presumably, unless he's playing a giant trick on us. This is a book about a fairy tale. This is going to be a fantasy story in some way or another, and it just feels kind of fitting thematically for us to start to end in a similar place to the place we started. Right, the Dark Tower is many things, but I think it is a epic fantasy story. And it just to me makes sense that we finish on King's modern look at a fairy tale. And so it just felt like it fit to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think even though we still don't know actually what's going to happen in this story, I think there's some through lines we could draw between this character and Jake Chambers as the kid who has to go through the portal into
Yeah.
the other realm. Again, we're going to look really silly if we're just on totally the wrong track here. But I mean, just broadly speaking, though, like Jake and this kid have some things in common. Not everything, definitely. I mean, definitely very disjoint characters in some ways, but it's a comparison that I find. I guess I simply found myself thinking about characters like Traveling Jack and Jake Chambers and all these other like kid who has to go on a quest. Force, he fits in that group, I think.
I agree. I agree completely. I think one thing that is really interesting with this, though, is that Charlie is older than all those
Mhm.
kids, right? The age group that King has normally selected for these kids going on these epic adventures is 11, 12, 13, right around the start of puberty and the transition from true child into teenager into early adulthood. Charlie is 17, right? So Charlie is like done with all that and actually right on the cusp of just being a full-blown adult, right? And it does strike me as an interesting choice there, like, because I could see a version of this where Charlie is just younger, where Charlie is that 11, 12, 13 year old, just like all these other stories. But it feels like a specific intentional choice to make him older, and I just want to keep that in mind because I think that will probably matter in some way as we go through the story.
Yeah. I guess I'll withhold my thoughts on that for a bit because we'll probably get to it. Yeah.
Sure. One of the weird things about this book, Matt, is I've heard fairly mixed things about this book. Right? I think I've heard some people that say this is one of their favorite King novels, and I've heard some people say that this is one of their least favorite King novels. Although I have noticed something kind of unique to this book and all the books that we've covered on the show is that this is the one where like I feel like people like bust out of the bushes, like burst out of any place possible to let you know they hated this book. Like anytime it's referenced anywhere on any of our social medias, on Reddit, anywhere they were doing this book, there will always be one or two people that's just like, I hated this one. This is the worst. This is the worst. And like it's not that I think it's generally true that every single Stephen King book has people that are just like, no, that's his worst one. Just like every single King book has people say, no, that's his best one. I just think
Mm.
it's really funny how the people that really dislike this book are like really into you knowing that, that they really don't like it. Which almost makes me more excited for it, right? Like this is part of the fun of me getting to do this with you real time is I'm going into this book with the knowledge and awareness that it has a pretty mixed reception. And so I'm really interested and curious to discover the why of that. Like, I think I can probably imagine why people love this book, but like why people are so against it is something I'm very curious about.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I think it would be really funny if we hated the last book in Kingslingers. That would be a good joke
Yeah.
for everyone to enjoy. But I don't know. I mean, I think like you, I just want to find out what is it that's polarizing about it.
Yeah.
Like what choices specifically are causing people to feel that way. I'm excited to find that out.
Yeah, me too. I will say, like, I don't think what you just said is going to happen for me specifically. Like, and I, not because I generally like all Stephen King books, which I do. I think there's like going to be like a weird thing for this book for the two of us, and I'll speak for myself only here. You might agree with me or not. There's like a lot of emotional attachment and deeper meaning attributed to this book now because it is our final book in this whole series. We've been doing this for 5 years. It's become an incredibly important part of our lives. You know, we love doing this so much. We love all our listeners, and so like this is an emotional time for me as we start this book. And so I feel like I'm just primed and in the zone for this book to resonate with me. Maybe not even because of anything happening within the book itself, but just like the circumstances around our reading of the book, like are gonna just prime me to love it. So what I'm saying is here, if you come to this thing like expecting, like I can't wait till Scott and Matt hate this book, on my end at least, I feel like I'm probably going to disappoint you, and I just want to declare this here up front that like I, the odds of me disliking the last book we cover on the show are just so minute. I don't see it happening.
Well, I'm open minded to the idea of hating this book, Scott. No,
You're a
no,
liar. No,
no.
I'm trying to be honest with like even subconsciously of where I'm at with this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, I think the way we approach stuff is usually not in a way where disliking it is likely because
Hmm.
we're basically practicing the exercise of like let's find something interesting and engaging to talk about, and it's like
Yeah.
it's really hard to not enjoy that process actually.
Yeah.
So
I am not actually saying that like there is zero chance that I will end up not enjoying this book. Very possible with any book. But what I'm saying is like I think sometimes a lot of what you love about the books that you love the most are not just the thing that you're reading, but like the place that you were when you were reading it, like either physically or emotionally or both. You know, I think some of my most enjoyable reading experiences have been when I'm in a tough time in my life and I'm using this world and these books as a place to kind of escape from that for a little bit. And so, you know, I appreciate it on a deeper level that I normally would have. So I am very emotional going into this book. I'm very excited, but I'm also very sad that this whole thing is not coming to an end, as we said, but coming to a transition point.
yeah,
And so I feel like I'm just going to love this book because of that.
makes sense.
Yeah. All right. With all that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the book itself, huh? You want to finally talk about Fairy Tale 30 minutes in?
Sure, I guess.
So the book opens with this, Matt, and I wanted to talk to you about this because it's kind of like King's dedication. He says, thinking of REHERB and, of course, HPL. Fairly certain that the names we're referring to here, Matt, are Robert E. Howard, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and H.P. Lovecraft. For those that maybe don't know, Robert E. Howard created the Conan series. I think per Wikipedia, he's kind of considered the father of the sword and sorcery subgenre of history. Edgar Rice Burroughs, of course, you probably know as the creator of Tarzan, and then John Carter of Mars. These pretty popular science fantasy stories from gosh, almost 100 years ago now. And of course, we all know H.P. Lovecraft. I think that goes without saying. So it's an interesting thing to do here at the beginning of the book, Matt, because King is in essence kind of declaring his influences in the novel, right? Like these are the people I was thinking about as I wrote the book. I was thinking about Robert Howard and perhaps Conan. I was thinking about Edgar Rice Burroughs and John Carter of Mars, perhaps. I was thinking of H.P. Lovecraft and Lovecraftian horror and these type of things. Um, I do think it's really interesting the way he did it, though. Like he didn't just say thinking of Edgar Rice Burroughs. He said thinking of ERB, which is not like an impossible code to crack, but it also is one more step of work for us, the reader, rather than just spelling out the names. I'm curious, like why do it that way? What do you think?
I don't know. I guess maybe just to it would be a little more distracting if it were their names.
Sure.
Also, it kind of gives you a little reward for having figured it out, right? Like
Yeah.
what's funny is I did the audiobook again as always. So when he went through the initials, he did it real fast. REHERB and of course HPL. And what's funny is my brain just discarded the first two. It was like that. Those are combinations of letters. And then HPL, I was immediately like HP Lovecraft. so I caught on one of them, and then the other
Mhm.
two, had to go back and figure out. But I think there's a bunch of interesting things we can say about this. Like you said, it's interesting that it's three names. It's also interesting to me what name is not on there. There's no JRRT on there,
True. Yeah.
which I think that we already know that King loves Tolkien and
Yeah.
is deeply influenced by Tolkien. So it's almost like by not mentioning Tolkien, it's a sort of, I mean, it's always possible, of course, that Tolkien is so in his bones that he doesn't even feel the need to reference it. But there's also the possibility that he's kind of consciously excluding that kind of sensibility from his work, because
Yeah.
Conan is a very different sensibility. Lovecraft is a very different sensibility from Tolkien.
Yeah.
These are different kinds of stories. They feel different. They don't end happily, um, and maybe that's what we're doing here.
They're also not fairy in the Tolkienian sense of the word, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could call them fairy tales in the broader sense of this idea of crossing a threshold. Like John Carter of Mars, very specifically, is John Carter. I believe he's like a Civil War soldier, right? That finds himself suddenly on the planet Mars in the middle of this interplanetary struggle, which feels very fairy in like its construction, but not in all the signposts of that you would typically see, which is an interesting choice in a novel called fairy tale. Like
Hmm.
if you tell me Stephen King made a novel called Fairy Tale, he's kind of specifically trying to do a very specific classic kind of fairy tale conceit. Who would he dedicate or say his influences on the novel were? I probably wouldn't say H.P. Lovecraft or Edgar Rice Burroughs, despite the fact that it's true. But I think you're right. Like Tolkien would be one of the ones I see there. Maybe maybe we're overcomplicating this, and it's just because Tolkien had like a very specific definition of fairy, and I think he wrote a whole essay about this called "On Fairy Stories." It's a very interesting read. Y'all should read it, where he basically like, defines what a fairy story is and what a fairy story isn't, and he like has a bone to pick with things that call themselves fairy tales that contain none of the world of fairy in it at all. It clearly bugs him, and maybe King's like, well, I don't want to want to piss him off, so we'll just not say he influenced this at all. But I don't know, interesting stuff for sure. Get your brain turning, because I think it is fair to say like we've made the assumption that Charlie will be entering into some different world, and I think it's fair. Like when you look at references to Edgar Rice Burroughs, when you look at references to Conan, it just seems like that's absolutely what's going to happen if you're thinking about these guys when you're writing your book.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we're going to end up with some kind of, Lovecraftian fairy tale, right? I don't know what that means exactly, but I guess we'll find out.
It's going to be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the actual quote that begins the book, though, is one that's a little bit more obvious and in its ability to parse, which is, "And always let your conscience be your guide." That is from Blue Fairy, and we know this one, right, Matt? This is Pinocchio. Let's talk about this for a bit.
Yeah. All kinds of references with Pinocchio. It's a rich vein of I guess. I mean, is it a fairy story? First of all, it's got a fairy in it, but really, it's
Um,
about this wooden boy.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about Pinocchio is that, like, when we talk about is it a fairy story, are we talking about the original story, or are we talking
Mm,
about the Disney movie that everyone's thinking about when they hear Pinocchio? Um, I feel like in the original story, Pinocchio definitely like is a fairy story in the
mm,
Tolkienian definition of it. He travels to other worlds. He travels to the world of fairy. Um, But this quote is from the Disney movie. Like
Uh,
in the original Pinocchio story, the blue fairy was not called the blue fairy. I think she was called like the fairy with turquoise hair or something. And
mm,
it's Disney that labeled her as blue fairy, and it's Disney also that defined the concept of conscience and conscience being a thing in the Pinocchio story. Because really, I believe the original Pinocchio story is just like, here's this little piece of shit wooden boy always doing bad stuff,
uh-huh.
and here's a fairy come to chastise him about it every so often. It's like, hey, you're fucking up again. And they specifically wanted to kind of sand the edges. Hey, you see what I did there of Pinocchio when they converted it to Disney. So this quote
uh,
is from the Disney version of Pinocchio.
okay. Yeah, well, so okay, let's set aside the Pinocchio specifically and just say the quote itself, let your conscience be your guide. I feel like the book puts the idea of conscience pretty front and center in
Yeah,
our character's view on his own behavior
yeah,
and in the regards to his debt to God that he thinks he has.
hmm,
Um, he seems to, there's a lot of stuff in his character that's almost like painstakingly conscientious,
yeah,
right? Like he's not. It's funny. He's far from our Pinocchio, who is just this stupid. I mean, basically, Pinocchio is a stupid kid
yeah,
who makes tons of mistakes, and then he learns not to do that. But this kid is like a great kid, like like already when we
yeah,
meet him,
yeah.
fully morally developed, probably better than most adults, and I don't know what we're going to do with that, but that seems pretty obvious at this point.
I agree, and I think one of the interesting things with that is our frame of the story, like so many King stories, is this is someone years later writing down the story of these events. So telling someone this is what happened to me, and you begin to wonder, like, I don't always want to do this. Like, I think that the whenever you're not sure about what's going to happen, our kind of default is go, oh, are we dealing with an unreliable narrator situation? And I don't actually think that's the case here, but it is interesting to think when you have a character that is kind of established this morally good, that like this is just like he's almost like a paragon of goodness in the chapters we see here, and he references things that he did bad in his past, but they're it's he's so far removed from it, and every behavior and every choice we see and every thought we see him have throughout the course of these 5 chapters is one of goodness and moral rightitude. And it does make you kind of go like, huh, interesting, is that an accurate depiction of this person, or is he seeing himself in the best possible light? I don't know.
Yeah. I'm going to save my full fusillade for later, but I do have some thoughts about the possibility of him being an unreliable narrator. Uh, I'll just say for now that it's something I'm taking seriously, although probably leaning away from, but not dismissing entirely.
Mm, yeah, yeah. All right, I look forward to getting into that with you in a little bit.
Okay.
But let's begin the book itself. Chapter 1, The Goddamn Bridge, The Miracle, The Howling. Before we talk about the actual content of this chapter, I did just want to briefly talk about this chapter title thing here, Matt, which do this thing where they briefly discuss like high level one short sentence versions of everything that goes down over the course of the pages. We haven't specifically seen this done with King before in the books we've covered. I do know that he does this on the novel Revival, and I believe The Mist, the short story The Mist, he does this as well. But you and I have read books where this is done before. The one that pops up into my mind so distinctly was Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, where he essentially has the same conceit. He gives a chapter number and then almost a paragraph of here's all the things that are going to go down in this chapter.
Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what it reminded me of. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I really like it. I really like it, right? It's just like you kind of get to play this little mini guessing game at the start of every chapter. Is like you read that and you're like, "Ooh, what does this mean? What does that mean?" Like it's a really good kind of hook for each chapter. You almost don't have to end on a cliffhanger when you have this perfect laid hook in the title of each chapter. I really enjoy it.
I think it's one of many things that he's doing with this book to kind of keep us hooked and pulled along because
Yeah,
part of me, I'm going to try to make this come out right, but like not much happens in these 5 chapters.
true. Yeah,
One could say it's kind of slow, but I never really felt that because I feel like he's always throwing us little bones like this,
Yeah.
setting up questions in our minds and then paying them off, or dribbling out answers, and even just the idea of what exactly what you just said, setting up the chapter title as being kind of a lead in to like, oh, aren't you wondering what the howling refers to? That's evocative.
Yeah.
Like he does a lot of stuff like this. So my interest level is actually very high, even though like we have just objectively been moving pretty slowly plot wise.
I completely agree. And this is the first time, Matt, in the Kingslingers project that I have had to stop reading,
Uh-huh.
and I did not want to. I
Did
did
not
not.
like that.
I did not like that. Especially since like the end of chapter 5 is literally like, all right, come by tomorrow and I'll tell you everything. And then I turned the page and saw the chapter was ending and was like, fuck, I have to wait. I have to wait until next week. Well, this isn't fair.
uh
But yeah, no,
Revenge
I
is
think
sweet.
he's doing a very good job of keeping it, of propelling us through what is objectively a very intentionally, deliberately paced start to this whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, actually, I'm going to say this after you read this next bit.
Okay. Well, but before we get into that, though, I did just want to mention another cool conceit of this. The structure of this book is that each chapter has a little bit of artwork under the chapter title. This is not something you get to see. You audiobook readers do not get to see. But I shared the first one here with you, Matt, just so you got an example of it. This is a picture of the Psycho House. And I like this little, like, just like I like the little short titles. I like the pictures. Like it makes you feel like you're in a fairy tale type story. We have a
Totally.
little title with these. I like it a lot.
I love this picture, right? I mean, it's very gothic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a very classically and stylized 3-point perspective of this
Yeah.
house. So the house looks like it's looming in a really dramatic way, and there's a lot of contrast. It's ink. Just it's just a great drawing. And then the Beware of Dog, it like situates us in like it's like the center of the image, left to right. I don't know, just really great, well designed picture to me.
Yeah. I agree. And they're all good. I maybe I'll just like copy paste them all for you so you can see them. I feel bad that you're going to miss some of these. Like the one disadvantage of audiobook reading is you miss some of this fun stuff in the book itself. But
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind doing that, that'd be cool.
sure, easy enough. All right. Here it is, Matt. We are finally on the opening words of the book. Here we go. I'm sure I can tell this story. I'm also sure no one will believe it. That's fine with me. Telling it will be enough. My problem, and I'm sure many writers have it, not just newbies like me, is deciding where to start. First of all, I'm always kind of in love with opening sentences because like they have the power to do so much, and I really like the way this book is starting off, like uh, immediately declaring itself as a first person story, in which King is going to have a person kind of be writing down their experiences in the past. This is Bilbo writing There and Back Again, right? This is Frodo writing The Lord of the Rings. These are a person who has lived an experience and come out the other side writing about that experience to us. And then King does something interesting here where he makes the person in the story a newbie storyteller, right? He calls himself a newbie, like someone, I do not have a lot of experience writing. I'm not even sure how to tell this story. I'm not sure where to start the story. I'm not sure if my telling of it's going to be good enough. And I love this because like a cynic would look at this and be like, oh, Stephen King's just giving himself an excuse for his poor writing here because he's established if the story's not coherent, well, it's Charlie's fault, not Stephen's fault, which shut up. That's not why. It's for a lot of very specific character reasons, but I really like it. I really like just this first paragraph, like how much we've established as far as tone, as far as who Charlie is. It's all right here, I think.
Yeah, I love it. I love this book's voice. Talked a lot
Mm-hmm.
recently in the last few books about the voice. I feel like Doom McKee and 11/22/63 were both. One of those was first person. The other one was close third person, and with a
Mm-hmm.
very firm voice, I think. And both voices felt very distinct from what I think of as being King's default, this voice also feels very distinct from what I feel is King's default. I mean, what's funny is Mr. Mercedes also feels very different from his default, but I think that's because he's kind of going for a different genre. But maybe the
Yeah.
correct conclusion is just that King does whatever the hell he wants with his voice. Um, but yeah, so far, part of what's lovable about this character is like this sense of presence that comes through the narrative voice.
Yeah, I love that, and I actually like. I agree with you that it's different from his default, but then I sit here and like I strain to think of what his default is, because I think you're right. Like it feels like he's been doing this for so long,
Right.
that like he's just like, it's one thing if you like set up this is my narrative voice and then also I can do all these other things. It's another just be like every one of my things is so different and unique that like the thing I find interesting about it is it both feels to me like vintage Stephen King doing Stephen King, while at the same time you're right, like having a different feel, having a different voice. It's like it's same thing with Eyes of the Dragon, which I think will probably also compare to this book a lot, as they're both kind of dealing with fantasy in a YAE way.
Hmm.
That felt like it was definitely Stephen King, but also definitely him throwing that voice to do something a little bit different. So,
Hmm. Yeah, it
um,
makes sense.
so we're also introduced here at the beginning, Matt, to the shed, the place where it seems like the story is actually going to start, or will start once the required backstory is established. Since I'm allowed to speculate now, Matt, because I don't know the answer, I'm going to say the shed is going to serve as our magic wardrobe that will lead us into Narnia, or whatever else we're going to call it. That is the portal. That is the threshold. Going into the shed will do it for us. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
It's like the easiest prediction I've ever made in my entire life.
Right. It's gonna be funny when we're wrong, but yeah,
Yeah,
that was my thought as well. Is that's the doorway? That's the um maybe I'm being too literal, but I feel like maybe it's a tunnel, that goes like down, because
sure.
that's what the book cover kind of hints at.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, um,
I do
you know,
think, by the way, it's funny, like how convinced you were that this was just going to be a midworld story. Like, like I
I
didn't
was
know enough to know whether you were right or wrong, but I was impressed by just how assured you were about this whole thing.
like the visual language of the cover to me was like Crimson King
Oh, very much
and
so. Yeah.
going into another realm, and I was like, well, there's another realm that's clearly associated with the Crimson King, and that is Midworld. So that was my thought process. We'll see.
It's a fair guess. It's a fair
Yeah.
guess, but yeah, we don't know. We don't know.
Another comment I wanted to make about the beginning of the book and how he kind of says like, well, the story, like, it really starts with the shed, but then in order to explain the shed, first I have to explain this. In order to explain that, first I have to, and then he like backs into talking about the accident with his mom. It just because it was like the first thing that jumped into my mind, it reminded me of the opening of one of my favorite novels, Blind Sight, where um, he says like it didn't start with and then he lists a bunch of sci-fi mumbo jumbo, and then he's like, I guess it all really started with this one time I was bullied on the playground as a child, and then we, fairly, and then we sort of, the through line carries us from there to who this character is later in life, and then, crazy sci-fi stuff happening. But I guess one reason that or another reason that occurred to me is like, first of all, that's like a horror pastiche with a lot of Lovecraft elements, but it starts out in this grounded playground bully scenario, and uh, which is also very reminiscent of Ender's Game, while we're sort of describing what colors go into things.
Sure.
But yeah, like I think it's important, if you're going to do a weird story where your character ends up in a weird situation, you've got to ground things really firmly first, and King knows that, and that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the thing that's most effective about this kind of cause and effect chain that he constructs for us here is that it hooks you. Like, it is really interesting that you can basically say, this is the story. The story is actually what Charlie experiences in the shed. However, in order for you to appreciate that story, I got to tell you this, 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 and this. It also reminds me of Les Mis, the novel, by the way, which is literally a book that starts with like, for all the events of this book to make sense, I'm going to have to tell you about this guy first, this priest. He doesn't matter to the story, but it does matter that you understand who he is. And then he talks about him for like 50 pages in this novel. And I mean, it's a similar thing here where it's like, obviously the book has constructed like Charlie going into the shed, it establishes is a thing that is going to happen. This is a padlock shed. He's going to go in it, and something is going to happen. But in order for that to have emotional and thematic weight for you, you're going to have to understand how he became friends with Bowditch in the first place. You're going to have to understand that. You're going to have to understand his miracle with his father. To understand, you're going to have to understand what happened to his mother. And we build backwards to the bullying on a playground event in this book, which is the freak death of his mother. And for whatever reason, the book drawing that chain out for us and then saying, okay, now follow it link by link is like crack for me. I'm just like, okay, I'm in. I'll follow it link by link. I can't wait. Let's go. Let's do it.
Yep.
I'm hooked.
Me too. I mean, yeah, like it's, I'm still not sure what story we're in, but I am hooked. Like, I think another way of saying that is I care enough about Charlie Reed that I don't mind that I don't know where we're headed, which is really where I always want to be with stories. Like, I don't try to make me care about the plot, make me care about the characters, and then the plot happens to them, and I go, oh no.
Maybe this is a too broad of a question to ask you, but here, we're last book. We're going to be celebrating kind of our victory lap here for the next few weeks. After 5 years of this, like, when in your estimation does a story have to kind of tell you what its story is? Like, is there a hard line of like percentage of the way through the story? What do you think?
I don't know. I don't think there's, it depends on what the shape of the story is. And I mean, if it's a good story, you're going to get to that point not too quickly, because there's all, like, I'm not one of these people who think the hero's journey is like the correct way to tell stories. Far from it. I think that there's lots of different story structures. There's or rather, story structures are things that we impose onto the imagination, right?
Yeah.
But that disclaimer being said, most types of stories rely on grounding you in something relatable and mundane.
Sure.
Before launching you into something fantastical. Even non-genre work needs you to relate to the characters first. So usually that kind of stuff, you're spending time setting the table and you aren't necessarily tipping your hand as to what kind of story you're in. But I think, it's all basically, the question is fundamentally like, well, when is the real inciting incident past which there is no return? And that is the part of the story where we better be finding out where things are headed and what kind of story this is. And I guess one way of saying it is like the real inciting incident hasn't really happened. Like, maybe in retrospect, we'll look back and we'll say, oh, him coming to the rescue of the old man was the inciting incident, but sort of no, because he could still back out.
Yeah. I don't think so. I think that's what we talked about at the beginning of the episode, which is that like the thing that will propel Charlie on his hero's journey has not occurred yet. Now the setting of how he gets into the situation where that inciting incident can occur is what happens over the course of this week and perhaps some of next week's chapters as well. But yeah, we don't know what his story is yet. I agree with you, by the way. I don't think there's a hard, fast rule about this. I would think, like, generally, if we reach the end of next week's episode, which is another 5 chapters and another roughly 90 pages, and we're banging on 200 pages into this book, and we still haven't even introduced the idea of that threshold crossing, I would be like, okay, what are we doing here? We need to. We need, like, I'm not even saying he has to enter the world of fairy by the end of next week. I'm just saying, like, he should probably know that it exists and perhaps the incident that leads to him having to go on this journey should have occurred.
So another story that's reminded me of that could go a different direction, right, is Low Men in Yellow Coats, which has similar idea of kid interacting with old man who he meets, and the two of them have a deep relationship. But that story quickly introduces the idea that like this old man is on the run from something,
Mm-hmm.
and it quickly lets you know like the old man's on the run, the kid's got to help him, and that's the tension. Right now we don't really know where the tension is originating from because nothing has really created that tension. So
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, I can't wait. I can't wait.
yep.
All right, so we learn the story of Charlie's hometown and the bridge that killed his mother. One thing I want to point out here early, Matt, is that this does feel just like vintage King for me in the the patience with which he does set this stuff up. Like there's just something about like the care with which King slow rolls this early part of the story. Just like the words have purpose yet for the overarching story of this book, but it seems like it's just like a celebration of, hey, I'm putting words on paper. Like, I don't know. Listen to this. There was talk every year in the town council about paving the deck and adding at least one sidewalk. But every year, it seemed like there were other places where the money was needed more urgently. I don't think a sidewalk would have saved my mother, but paving might have. There's no way to know, is there? That goddamn bridge. Like it feels like King like just saying, I'm just gonna do what I do best here. And he's nailing it. Like the entire time he's nailing it. I don't know how to describe it better than that, but
Well, it's very cleanly written. Like it's just very
yeah. Hmm.
like the sentences aren't excessively short, really, but they have a flow to them. I mean, listening to you read that out loud really hammered in how it's almost got a da 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 sort of like rhythm to it that's very
Yeah.
pleasing to listen to.
I think King has said this is supposed to be YA fiction. I don't
Mm,
think King ever like comes out and like says, "Okay, when I publish this book, please put it in the YA section of your local bookstore." But I do feel like that's the feeling I get that it's supposed to maybe match with the age of Charlie in the people reading it, which is or perhaps slightly younger. And
mm.
so maybe the sentence structure is. I mean, it's weird to say this without feeling like I'm demeaning young adult fiction. I don't think I am at all. But it feels like this is the target for it, and I think that what you just said, that da 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 is part of that to me.
Yeah, I like that.
So Charlie tells us the story of his mother walking across the bridge to get some chicken. What I think is like painfully excruciating detail here, Matt. We get to know all about Mr. Zippy, the best chicken in the city. We get to see his mother's little Red Riding Hood raincoat, which is King having some fun with us a little bit
Mm,
here. We get to see all of this in excruciating detail up until the moment where she gets struck by a car and dies. Um, it's again, it's not just that this is an event that happens to Charlie, but it is such a defining event for him. It is the beginning of this cause and effect chain that will define this entire story, that it's like he needs us to see it and to understand it completely. And
yeah.
that's why we spend so much time on all the little details of it.
Yeah, we have to understand who he is, where he's coming from, and maybe
Hmm.
this will help us understand why he makes choices that he'll make later in the book.
Yeah.
Just to riff on that Little Red Riding Hood idea, Little Red Riding Hood is the hero of that story, and
Yep.
she survives and she defeats the big bad wolf. And this is a story that introduces Little Red Riding Hood and then kills her brutally and senselessly immediately. So
Yeah.
we're kind of saying something about the tone.
Sure.
Um, and I mean, I think one interesting separate topic, interesting thing about like the sequencing of information and how it's doled out to us is we are understanding this backstory about Charlie's mom before we really know anything about Charlie.
Yeah.
Like we don't really know what age this character is. Like the who is speaking to me right now? I
Yeah.
don't know. I know that something happened to his mom. And that's I guess in one it's like it's fine. I'm not complaining. It's just like the he centers this event so much so that I don't even know who he is while I'm listening to this story.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. Like we know that it seems like the majority of the events of the story are going to take place with a 17-year-old Charlie, right? The events of this particular story take place in 97 or 90, like where he's, I think, a young child.
Mhm.
Um, but the narrative voice is an older Charlie writing back on this, and we don't know how old that guy is. Like, I guess we could make the assumption that if the story takes place in 2013, perhaps it's being written in the present when it was out, so 2022, 2023. But that's just conjecture. We don't actually know that. And all these things are defining and characterizing Charlie, but it's like, you're right, which Charlie are we characterizing? Are we characterizing the narrative voice Charlie? Are we characterizing the Charlie, the character that exists in the story proper? Is it both? Is it all of them at the same time? I think that's a really astute point, that we this is helping us learn about Charlie, but it's not like we meet him, spend 2 chapters with him, and then get the story related to us. This is first. This is the
Right.
first thing.
I like your question as to, is this an older Charlie looking back on the events of the story, writing about his 17-year-old self, or is this Charlie has an adventure and then he sits down to write it down, right? It's
Yeah.
we don't know that yet either.
I think we kind of, so there is a moment in, I think, chapter 3 or 4 where he is like observing the sad puzzle table in the cellar and says, I didn't really understand the emotion I was feeling then, but I'm older now and I get it
Mm.
now. And so it means this, this, and this. So it does seem to be an older Charlie. But how old is he? I mean, is he 28? Is he 40? Like, those, a completely different perspective on that. And I think that's really interesting. I think that's one of the things this whole structure of telling a story back does, is that like the narration itself becomes characterization, that based on what Charlie says in the narrative, we are defining him as a person both then and now. And it matters then and now to what we're doing. And I really like it. I do.
Me too. Cool.
This is another thing I wanted to talk to you about. Charlie is talking to his father, and he says, there's always someone at fault, Dad said, which is not the same as blame. Do you blame the man who hit Mom? I asked. He thought about it, raised his glass to his lips, and drank. This was 6 or 8 months after Mom died, and he'd pretty much given up on beer. By then, he was strictly a Gibney's man. Gilbey's? Gilbey's? That's not a real...
Gilby's.
Is that a real whiskey? I don't know.
I don't know.
I try not to. And mostly I can't do that unless I wake up at 2 a.m. with nobody in bed but me. Then I blame him. The reason I pulled this out, Matt, is and this is a guess again, because I don't know. It feels like the concepts of fault and the concept of blame are something established pretty early in this book. This is for the very beginning. And then I think we hit that beat in different ways over the next 5 chapters, to the point where it's made me think that this is going to end up being like sneakily important to our story, like what we're doing here, with the difference between blame and fault, and the difference between someone being at fault for something and blaming something for something, and one being, I guess, objective truth, and the other being the way you approach responsibility and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, once again, the concept of conscience is relevant, as Jiminy Cricket would put it. I think responsibility, these are more like conscience and responsibility are more like the words we use for the internal sense of our own blame or our own fault.
Sure.
But yeah, fault. All these things I think are going to be examined in this book.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, Charlie's mom, Little Red Riding Hood, is killed in this horrible freak accident. And it strikes me how many like fairy tales start this way. One parent, usually a mother, killed, the other parent forced to solo parent, or worse, bring in some sort of stepmother.
Yeah.
Of course, that doesn't happen. Unless, I guess maybe the stepmother in this instance is Booze.
I like that. Didn't think of that. That's great.
I do just want to point out here that King has once again created a single parent household in his story, which he does quite a lot. But also, again, he's reversed it from his own life experience, right? His dad walked out and he was raised by his mother. But King very often creates this own situation where we see here where the parent is the father is the single parent in this situation, which I think is especially interesting when he's writing this from the perspective of being a dad and not having a dad, which I don't know, I don't know what to do with that, but I think it is really, really interesting. I love when I see him, like, what he does this so much. Obviously, like his father, not having a father had a huge impact on him in his life. And he writes about a relationship between a father and son so much. And it's all from the perspective of being that father, not having that father.
Yeah. And this is a really particular and vivid character, but like the father's a great character, and this is a really solid and compelling relationship that they have that I was very quickly invested in.
Yeah. Yeah, especially since like we define him and then make him a scumbag, kind of like that's unfair to say, but he basically does not do well with the death of his wife, and he succumbs to alcoholism. And Charlie is basically forced to grow up very quickly, right? He basically becomes a '90s latchkey kid where he's coming home, making his own food, like taking care of both of them, um, and and just surviving as his father like destroys himself day by day.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so King, he certainly does do the alcoholic or addict characters from time to time. But I feel like
Hmm.
it's a more of a later career thing to have the main character be someone other than that character, someone with the
Yeah.
perspective on that character. Um, like Jake Epping, his characters around him have substance abuse problems that he doesn't. Um,
Yeah.
Not a hard and fast rule, but definitely just something I was considering. That like early career King would have made the main character be an alcoholic. That's
Yeah. No, I think
um,
you're right. I think you're right. I think King is much more interested when he's talking about addiction and alcoholism and these struggles. He seems to be much more interested in really diving into the perspective of the person forced to live with those people,
mhm,
and I wonder if part of that is just the guilt he carries for putting the people he loved through that. Like in this situation, he was not Charlie Reed; he was George Reed, right?
mhm,
And that is, I think, ultimately like it's really interesting. Like we see this complicated relationship between this father and son, and in this moment, like he says, "Come on, Charlie, what do you say, Shay?" I hated the slur in his voice. "Fuck you, Dad." I've never heard. I've never said such a thing in him to my life, and I sort of wanted him to come in and give me a slap or a hug, something anyway. Instead, I heard him shuffle into the kitchen where the bottle of Gilby's would be waiting.
it's got
The
to be
I
Gilby's.
Yeah, the I and the L in there, and my poor old man eyes are reversing as I say it. I love this so much. I love this idea of like this. I think he's like 13 at this point, telling like if I said "fuck you, Dad" to in 13, oh my god, I don't know what would have happened. But like defining George Reed as this man who like it would be so easy to hate. It would be so easy to hate him, and I don't hate him, right? Like I
Mhm,
pity him, and we also see him get through this worst part in his life, and so I feel like we just grow to love this guy. And I think
mhm,
part of this is once again King's perspective on alcoholism and the struggles and the horrible disease that it is. He is allowed to show this guy as being a horrible parent in these moments, but having sympathy on him in those like it's like a extension of what he did with Jack Torrance way, 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 way back in The Shining, but a much like softer, more muted, kinder examination of the disease, I think.
Also, I think what makes us softer towards Charlie's dad is that he knows that he's being a fuck up right now. Like
Yeah,
he
true.
he doesn't get mad at Charlie for saying that to him because he's like, yeah, I deserve that. He's not
Yeah,
like he doesn't go into a rage and hit Charlie because Charlie said that, even though Charlie sort of wants that kind of reaction from him because he's taking some measure of it's interesting. He's taking the blame. It's unclear whether he's taking responsibility. I think this is a semantic game that you and I will play over the coming weeks because one might say like, well, if he was taking responsibility, then wouldn't he have done something to change it? And I'm like, maybe I don't know.
yeah,
That's tricky. But he at least he doesn't blame. He doesn't take it out on Charlie, and that's important.
yeah. It's also this is kind of a character trait from George Reed. I think we see here, like we do see in these later chapters, like almost a fear of conflict with his son.
Mm,
And I don't know how much of this I'm putting into my stuff, or like there's so many moments where it's clear that there's like that Charlie is behaving a certain way with his kind of devotion to this man and his dog that is making his father a little bit uncomfortable, and he always kind of handles him with like with kid gloves, for lack of a better phrase, right? He's like afraid to push him on it too hard. And part of me is thinking maybe part of this is just like I am still harboring the guilt for what I put you through when I was at my lowest moments in my life. And so I feel like I can't be a parent to you on that side of it. Like I can't push you, I can't force you, I can't command you. I can suggest. I can like just like come on. Let's maybe think about this. But I'm not gonna parent you in that way. I don't know.
Mhm.
Am I completely making this up?
No, I think it's more of a vibe. I couldn't put a particular scene to what you're saying, but it definitely feels like maybe it's as simple as, Charlie's all he has left, and so he's terrified of pushing him away, especially given what you just said, that he feels like maybe doesn't have a lot of a lot of ground to stand on. So yeah, he seems to be very very gentle. Okay, so that's true, and I think there's something to that actually. But I also do wonder if this is just maybe the difference between how you parent an 11-year-old versus how you parent a 17-year-old, and how
Yeah.
we haven't really seen King do that. Because like something my dad said at one point to me was like, there's a point in parenting when you go from, I wish I remembered his words exactly because it was poetic, but it was like your criticisms go from molding to like crushing. Um, and I was like, wow, that like felt true when he said it, but from the other side, where it's like when you're a littleish kid and your dad criticizes or is like, don't do that, you're just like, yeah, yeah, okay. But when you're like 17 and your dad's like visibly disappointed in you, you're just like, oh my god, I'm a complete piece of shit.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
did like he like, and it just has to do with like the way that relationship morphs over time. So could be all kind of all of the above in a combination. I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of hope it's all of the above because I think that makes a much more interesting character. But I agree with you. Like, this is one of the differences by making Charlie 17 years old in this story. Um, it's almost kind of parroting by necessity. Like, you could tell an 11-year-old boy, no, I'm not going to let you become the primary caregiver for an old an old man. I don't
Uh-huh.
think you can do that, and I think you have bigger things you need to worry about right now. And I, as your parent, can tell an 11-year-old, don't do that.
Hmm.
Perhaps legally you can still tell a 17-year-old don't do that, but like you're kind of setting him up for failure because in a year or less he's going to have all the ability to make those decisions himself. And if you don't give him the leash to do that, he's just not going to be prepared for the reality of that world. So it does strike me very like the thing I'm thinking about, and we're all over the fucking place today, but the thing I'm thinking about is the pipe scene where he finally confronts Charlie about confronts is even the wrong word. He just wants to sit down with him and talk to him about his what he's doing and what he's signing up for with this old man. And he's never like he's never coming at any of this from the perspective of I can forbid this if you don't like acquiesce to my demands around it. It's just like, hey, I just want to talk to you like a adult and talk about this and make sure you're making the right decision and all that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is that he's 17. I do think part of that is that I think it is a beat that we see multiple times throughout this, that he is just like he is a little hesitant to push Charlie. Um,
Hmm.
but maybe that is just me wanting to see that in this book. I'm just not sure. We'll see.
Yeah, I guess we'll see.
hmm So ultimately, Charlie's dad gets worse and worse until the miracle happens. Another addict and former coworker named Lindy is going through the AA process, and as part of his process, he reaches out, sees a man in trouble, and offers to help Charlie's father, George, get better. He brings him to AA, and it works. George is able to get sober. And pick his life up. But I love the quote here. This is an AA quote: "Miracles ain't magic," which is such a fun turn of phrase here.
Hmm.
But that's not entirely true, is it, Matt? Because Charlie prays. He prays for a miracle, and not just prayed. He bargained for a miracle. He said, "Do something for me. Do this for me, and I will do whatever you want me to." This isn't how God is supposed to actually work, by the way. But who said it's God that answered? Right? We don't. We don't know for sure.
We don't know. And if it was, God is not always very nice in Stephen King's universe. So,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So time passes and Charlie gets older. He's heading into high school now. And I really like this is something. Maybe this is just like Charlie's dad is just like, after he comes out the other side of this alcoholism, is just like a really good dad, and everything we were talking about the last 10 minutes is nothing. But like this conversation where he sits his son down and is like, look, I don't have a lot of money. I started my own business. My business is going well, but I just don't make a lot of money. So I need you, as we enter high school and your schooling career is getting serious and deterministic, I need you to work your ass off. I need you to get scholarships. If you want to go to college, this is what I need you to do. Um, and I just, there's something like some so wholesome and lovable about it that I really like this character a whole lot.
yeah. Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, yeah, I think he talks to his son like his son is a young man who he's responsible for helping, which is, I think, how a father should treat their especially older child.
Hmm. Yeah. It's really fascinating just how committed to his promise to God Charlie is, though, Matt. I mean, like, I know this is for very specific story reasons, but as a young Catholic boy, I'm sure you experience this as well. I was constantly begging God for stuff, and he occasionally delivered, right? How else do you explain the N64 I got for Christmas that one year? But I never felt this like deep need to keep up my end of the bargain like Charlie does here. Perhaps it's just a matter of stakes and save my father from rampant alcoholism and give me Super Mario 64 are not on the same playing field. But if you had asked me at the time, I would have said they were. So I don't know. It is really just really interesting, like how committed he is to this that he knows he owes a debt, and if he reneges on it, like he could get his father in trouble. Like his father will just fall off the wagon
Hmm.
and everything bad will happen. And he lives his entire life doing all these things that his dad thinks is just about building his college resume is really his constant quest to save his father.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know that I quite saw it the way you just described it, where part of his like incredible moral uprightness that we see throughout his whole character is like trying to pay off this debt that he feels that he owes God. Um, that's because
I
I
think,
kind of saw it more as like he's waiting for God to tell him what he needs. But I think you're right that he's like in the meantime, he's like, what about this?
yeah,
Um,
yeah, I think so.
but
And by the way, I don't think that like detracts from any of like you can play this game where you're like, well, you're not actually moral, you're just afraid of consequences for lack of morality. And I was like, well, that's like Apple. That's at the end of the day, the behavior is still
right.
moral, right? So
Right.
who
I mean,
cares?
anyone who's conscientious, I think, is motivated partly by carrots and partly by sticks,
Yeah.
and there's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with that.
Sure. It's kind of how
But
our brains work. Yeah.
yeah, to speak, for myself, God never made it clear what He wanted of me, so I never could, ask Him for anything big, except for that
Yeah.
angelic vision I had when I was 7, where Gabriel said, "You will start a podcast," but I didn't know what a podcast was because I was 7, so I just ignored it.
And then one day you wake up and someone said, "Hey, have you heard that Serial podcast?" And you're like, "It's
That's
my
exactly
time.
what happened. Yep.
It's my time." Yeah. It's incredible. So there you go, folks. Kingslingers, ordained by God.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, the story shifts to Mr. Bojitz's house and the scary Cujo-like guard dog he has. I love that King can't help himself.
Yeah.
By the way, I think it's funny whenever he does references like this, especially it feels like late in his career, he's almost always like the movie and never the book. It's like that, like it's from that movie The Shining or from that
Mm,
movie Cujo. It's like him just having this real and present recognition that he's going to be most remembered through the stories that were adapted into popular films
mhm,
than anything else. And Cujo has just become like pop culture nomenclature. Like you don't even need to be just like going Carrie. Like these
mhm,
are just things people say without any specific reference to the source material in any way.
mhm. No, that's true. I mean, I guess it's also funny that this Cujo is like a 70-pound elderly German Shepherd, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
it's not
yeah.
Cujo.
That's so fun, right? Because like
Yeah.
the thing we're set up as the Bowditch house is that it's the Psycho house, that it looks like the house, it looks like Norman Bates' house from Psycho, and it allows you to see it, I think, very clearly. Like I have a very clear image of what the house from that movie looks like, and now I can see this house, and it attaches tone and things to it, and um, so we have a feeling of what this place is going to be, and of course it ends up not being that at all, right? And the
Mhm,
as we wrap up this chapter, Charlie is walking by the house, hears a dog howl, and then hears a man cry for help, and then rushes to help out, and
mhm.
that's where our chapter ends.
All right.
By the way, I think, speaking of like moral, as from the carrot or stick perspective, like I feel like you just like even if you're doing it because of the stick, even if Charlie is like volunteering and helping out and doing all these things for fear of consequences for his father, it turns you into the type of person that you hear a man cry for help and you instinctively hop a fence
Right.
and rush to their aid without, like, he's not thinking in the moment that he rushes to help out Mr. Bowditch, oh, this is going to get me in good with God, this is going to be the fulfillment of my promise. It ends up being that, right? But
Mhm.
that's not conscious in his mind when he's performing these actions, and that's, I think, ultimately like what morality is the subconscious actions you take in the moment a lot of times.
Yeah, totally. Totally agree.
All right, chapter 2, Mr. Bowditch, radar, night in the Psycho house. Again, like, if you just read that, you have a very different understanding of how this this chapter is going to go than the reality of it, which I just absolutely love.
Uh-huh. It's pretty funny when you point it out, yeah.
So Charlie jumps the gate to the Bowditch house and heads around back to where he finds a very, very old doggy protecting his very, very old master, Mr. Bowditch, who has fallen off his ladder and broken his leg pretty badly. Matt, there's something about, we'll talk about Radar a lot, I think, over the course of this whole thing, but there's something about the description of Bowditch himself that I couldn't get enough of. I couldn't tell how old Mr. Bowditch was, but pretty old. His hair was mostly white, although he must have been a real carrot top when he was younger, because there were still streaks of red in it. They made it look like his hair was rusting. The lines in his cheeks and around his mouth were so deep they were grooves. It was cold, but his forehead was beaded with sweat. I just like the idea of his hair rusting, like this perfect kind of, he's living in this house that is rusting, right? Like,
Mhm,
in fact, we'll see the tools that are sitting in the attic are themselves actually rusting, and it's this perfect physical description of this person that also defines his character a little bit. He's living alone in this house and drying up and rusting and wearing down.
mhm.
I love it so much.
I like this because it kind of situates both him and his house and his role in the world as like he's kind of like this caretaker that the world has passed by, and I I don't know if any of this is textual, but I get the feeling that like he sees himself as like a guardian of whatever this thing in the shed is,
Hmm.
and as he's getting older, he's realizing that he's not going to be able to keep doing this role,
Yeah.
and that's part of why he wants to start up this relationship with Charlie. But I like just again to return to your point that the idea of him being like even the man who is supposed to be protecting whatever this is, he himself is rusting.
Yeah, I love that. So this whole interaction, Matt, is absolutely stuffed with all this table setting stuff. We're defining Bowditch, defining Radar. We're clocking kind of how obedient of Charlie Radar immediately is, and we're also kind of deepening the mystery that is Bowditch. He just presents as this old man hiding something immediately, right? He's got this old rundown house, this mysterious shed. He's got these newspapers and magazines saved. He's clearly hiding something. We see like the single BB in his medicine cabinet that like King just like introduces us and we move on from. We're like, hey, wait, what was that? What does that mean? And we find out later possibly that was a little nugget of gold. All this just like really really hooky stuff here in this first introduction of this character and his world.
Totally, yeah, love it.
I also really love like the exchange of the Nietzsche quote. Like, what was it again? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah.
Which
Yeah, that
again, establishing why these two have a rapport, right? Like there is no way Bowditch expected Charlie to be able to respond with "Who said that?" quote.
right. Yeah, that immediately creates some uh rapport between them, right? And
Yeah,
Bowditch, I mean, he was honestly trying to talk down to the kid because Bowditch is not like a super nice and magnanimous guy. He was
yeah,
he and the fact that the kid rose to it, I think, really made a difference to him.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
Speaking of just like, you know, I mean, yeah, you just said the word hooky. Like it's a bunch of stuff that's drawing us in. You know, when Bowditch tells him not to snoop around the house, I immediately just burn to know what is in that house and what is in that shed. Especially after we hear the scrabbling, the chittering rather in the shed. It's like
Yeah.
there's some that the only even partially fantastical thing we've encountered yet, and I'm just like, okay, we gotta get the damn shed. When are we gonna get in the shed? It's great.
I do think like the second an adult tells a child don't snoop, like there's just an implicit understanding that he will be doing some snooping. And just like kind of everything else in this novel, it is pretty fascinating how slow rolling we're doing on this. Like Charlie actually like legitimately listens to that command for quite a good while. And in
Mhm.
fact, like over the course of these chapters, he's like slowly bringing himself more and more into the house. Like he doesn't leave the kitchen at first. Then he goes to the kitchen and the living room. And then he eventually goes upstairs, but like only after he's gotten permission. Like give it up for this kid. He's
Yeah,
not snooping, which is driving me crazy because I agree with you. I need all the answers, but pretty
yeah,
impressive.
it is.
The one absolutely unquestionable trait of Bowditch, Matt, is that he loves his dog. And faced with the possibility that he might be away from radar for a long time because of this bone break, he almost refuses to go to the hospital. But Charlie is here, and Charlie volunteers to help. But it's more than just volunteering to help, Matt. We get this line here. And then I thought something else. Only it didn't seem like it was my thought at all. I'm sure it was, but it didn't seem that way. We had a deal. Never mind picking up litter on the highway. This is where you hold up your end of it. Matt, I sometimes wonder what it would be like for a person to like pick up a random King book like this one for the first time and read a section like this. They probably would be forgiven for just assuming this is a figure of speech or a fun, uh metaphor for how powerful feelings sometimes occur to you. But no, this is just a king book, and this is just the presence of the white or some other force actually just talking to our character here, right? Right?
100%. It's, I mean, it just immediately reminded me of David Carver from Desperation.
Yeah, no, totally.
Just
Yeah.
hearing the voice of God and
Hmm.
probably not going to appear again, right?
Hmm. Uh, they take Mr. Bowditch off to the hospital, and Charlie stays back to wait till 6 p.m. to feed the dog. Matt, I know you, at least I think you don't currently have any dogs, but are you a dog person? I feel like just based on these 5 chapters alone and from some of the reactions from some of our listeners we've gotten when we said we were covering this book, I feel like your enjoyment of this book will depend on how much you love dogs a whole lot. um what
Makes sense.
what do you think?
Yeah. Oh, I love dogs. We had a family dog when I was a kid. Um, and I'm pretty sure that I'm like just allergic enough to dogs that living with the dog and owning a dog would be miserable for me. But I am definitely a dog person. I wish I could have a dog, and I love them, and so I'm totally susceptible to everything this book is doing. As I suspect are you.
Matt, that's the most tragic thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, I mean, I probably was like sick the entire time my family had the dog for for years and years. But you're not going to get rid of the dog just because
You
somebody's.
know that they make hypoallergenic dogs, right?
So I just like I love that phrasing. They, um, yeah. So I know that I've never really tested this and like gone and rubbed my face in one of these hypoallergenic dogs and done the experiment because what you really don't want to do is like get attached to it and then have to be like, no, I'm allergic.
Yeah. Well,
So
here I have one dog that is, what is the opposite of hypoallergenic? Um,
Hyperallergenic.
Hyperallergenic, yeah. That's my husky. So
Uh-huh.
you can't have that one. But I have a
Okay.
second dog that I believe is supposed to be hypoallergenic. Which, yeah, that's such a funny phrase because it's not true for any dog. It's like there's no such thing as like 100% not allergenic. Like that's not how allergies work. But it's just like less. I think the dogs shed less, so there's less opportunity for allergens to bother you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
you
it
can just
really
borrow
does
my
vary.
dog and see how it goes.
Not that anyone cares or asked, but like, yeah, there's some dogs where I can pet them and they can lick my hands and it's totally fine. And then there's some places where like I just go into somebody's house and I like practically go into anaphylaxis. So I think it just varies quite a lot,
You
dog to
visited me
dog.
not too long ago. Did you get horribly sick by being in my house?
No, I did not. So
Well, that's good.
yeah,
Good to hear.
yeah.
But yeah, I love dogs. I love Radar almost immediately. Like, and King is a dog lover as well, and you can tell just by the way he writes this relationship. Like, there is something unique and special about the relationship between a person and their dog. And I think King is capturing this rather beautifully just from the beginning. Like, you're like, I tweeted out very early in this book that if anything happens to Radar, I'm just gonna lose my fucking mind. Because King,
Mhm.
by the way, does not have a very good track record of uh, treating dogs well in the course of his stories. They usually don't make it out very well off.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things about this book that could make us not so happy.
Yeah.
Burn down the whole damn podcast.
I guess we should just say here, possibly, maybe this is the place to talk about it. There's something special about Radar, right? Like from a Fey fairy perspective, there's something about this dog, I think, beyond just the usual stuff, right?
Yeah, she seems to understand English a little bit too well, for one thing.
Hmm.
Um, but she also acts like a dog. So, like, I was
Yes.
debating whether I was like, is this like a person trapped in a dog body or something? And I was like, I don't think so. I think it's a
Hmm.
dog, but maybe just like a smart Fey dog, right?
Like a super fairy dog. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I would like that, but we'll see.
yeah.
Um, so the point is, Charlie really loves dogs too, and almost immediately falls in love with Radar as quickly as it seems like Radar falls in love with him. And we see here he comes back to see her not the next morning at 6 a.m. like he's supposed to, but in the middle of the night just because he's worried about her. And
Mhm.
and for her part, Radar seems incredibly relieved to see him. And this scene made me feel bad. I have to leave my doggies at home every day when I go to work, and I feel so bad for them. And I need to. I'm quitting my job. I'm working from home again. I can't do
Yeah,
this. I can't do this
for the dogs. I
for the
understand.
dogs. Yeah.
I love the bit where Charlie is like, so wait a minute, if one human year is 7 dog years, does that mean that one day away from the dog is like a week in isolation for the dog?
Yeah, I like that. I don't want to think about that. I don't want
Yeah,
to think about that.
yeah.
I love this as like I read that part and then I was like, wait, didn't Stephen King like just tweet about this like a week ago? And I looked it up and he did. Like he just randomly tweets out, "Do dogs have a sense of time passing, or is every day the same day?" Which
That's
is
hilarious.
a fun question. I mean, what do you think the answer is? Probably. I mean, they probably like know when they're I don't know, man. Cause like I feel like a dog's reaction to their master returning is always like appropriate based on how long they've been gone. Like when I've
Mhm.
been away from my dogs for a long time and they see me, they absolutely lose their minds. Whereas
Yeah,
like at the end of just being gone for like 4 or 5 hours, it's like, oh, I'm happy you're back, but like I'm cool.
yeah.
We're okay. So I feel like they must on some level recognize amount of time passing.
I think they do. I just don't. I wish I knew. I wish I honestly knew like what they're thinking about when they're sitting there, just not doing anything. Because
Yeah.
they're thinking something. They're just not thinking human shaped thoughts, and so
Yeah.
it's very difficult to kind of put yourself in that position.
I
Um,
wonder what my dog is thinking when I tell him get in the kennel for nighttime and he doesn't want to get in the kennel because he just want to sleep in the kennel, but he's not housebroken yet. But he
uh-huh.
gets in there every damn time because he knows he's going to get a treat. What
Yeah.
is he thinking? It's
He's,
like, all right,
I don't,
this is going to be worth it.
it's his conscience. His conscience is telling him Yeah, Skinner, this is good. This is what a good dog does. Good dog gets in the crate even if dog doesn't want to.
It's amazing. It's amazing how we bred these animals to think
I
this
know.
stuff.
It is.
What an amazing the power of selective breeding. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's no better place to say this, but I think maybe radar, the word radar being a palindrome means something. I mean, radar. Is there a famous dog radar, like
I don't
in a
think
movie
so.
or
I mean,
something?
what they specifically mention when they hear radar is the mash character.
Hmm.
Um and that's all they I feel like radar is like a dog name I've heard before. Um
I do
it
too.
seems like a common-ish dog name.
I
Um
agree, but I can't tell you a single referent.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I just looked it up, and here we have radar KPRC2's weather dog has died. So
oh, that
that's
must
a
have been
bummer.
it.
There was
Yeah.
also a 2023 movie called Radar the Bionic Dog, where radar has periods after it clearly stands for something.
Mm, okay.
It's only $4.19 to rent on Amazon Prime if you want to watch Radar: The Adventures of the Bionic Dog. I don't know. I think you're onto something about the palindrome there. I think that's really interesting. And
Or just the meaning of the name of it being radar. I don't know.
mhm,
We'll see.
yeah, I don't know. I love him. Her. I love her.
Yeah.
I used to call all dogs her because I've only ever had female dogs, and
Mm.
then we got a boy dog for the first time like 3 months ago, and now all dogs are boy because it's just I'm having a hard time with this. It's so weird.
Yeah, you're for you, dog is a gendered word.
All right, before he heads to school, Charlie stops by the hospital to check on Mr. Bowditch. He shows him a picture of Radar, and then Bowditch, understanding that he might be in the hospital, thinks about putting Radar down. Matt, what? What? I lost my mind at this.
Uh-huh.
I like
Yeah.
it's I really I wanted to explain this in a way that made sense to me. So I'm like, maybe he was like just testing Charlie, like feeling him out, like seeing how he'd react to the statement of like, oh well, I guess I'll kill my dog. Um and I think Charlie was like appropriately horrified at that fact. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess the way I read this was kind of like he um he knows that radar is elderly and he expects that if he dies or can't take care of the dog, then no one else will. So it's kind of like a choice between sending her to the pound where she'll inevitably be euthanized or just doing that, now. Uh, so
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very sort of coldly practical thought, which might be within scope for this type of character. But I don't know. I mean, you might be right that that's just not something that he would have jumped to.
I like that because I think it gets into his mindset of like, I am alone. It is me and her. And um I can't imagine anyone like
Mm,
I would never trust anyone, and I can't imagine anyone ever being able to take care of her. So I
yeah.
just know we lost our dog, gosh, a few months ago to cancer, and that's why we got a new one. Hooray.
Mm,
But the decision to finally put her down was not an easy one, and
yeah.
like not so like even when she was clearly suffering, uh it was not like something I would ever be cavalier about. But I am also not Mr. Bowditch, so I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's also a beat I want to mention here that I think I just want to mention here because it reoccurs several times throughout the course of these chapters. Charlie being completely uninterested in taking credit for saving Bowditch, right? Like every time someone says, "Oh, you saved him," he's always like, "Well, it was the dog. The dog howled. The dog. It's the dog." And everyone's always like, "Okay, but the dog didn't call 911, did she?" And he's like, "Well, no." But I don't know. I just think it's really interesting. We're getting this recurring beat, and it's obviously to establish Charlie as like a good person and like the type of person that's not going to want to take credit, not going to want to abuse this hero thing he's getting himself on. But I wonder if it's more than that. What do you think?
Yeah. I think this is where I'm going to interject my paranoid uh,
Oh,
uh, uh, idea of,
Okay.
we mentioned earlier the idea of unreliable narrator, and it's like, yeah, sometimes Charlie seems a little too perfect, and we know this is a story that Charlie is telling us about the past. And one of the things that really bugged me as we were going through, and I actually wanted to sort of ask you, like, did this also stick out to you as being something kind of alarming, is how we get these beats. It's not quite a three beat because I think there's already at least three of them, but
Hmm.
it's like he keeps referencing, like, yeah, back when I was younger, I used to hang out with this other guy, and oh boy, we got into some bad trouble. And I think maybe the first time I heard it, I was like, "Oh, Charlie, you're just being too hard on yourself because you're just a sweetheart. You guys probably, set off a firecracker in the woods, and you feel guilty about it." Um, but then, like, as we bring up more of these beats, he like successively brings up some like worse and worse stuff until like the last one we get, which I'm just gonna jump ahead, I guess. But he's like, uh, yeah, we called it a bomb threat to a school. And I was like, okay.
Yeah,
So you
one
actually,
of the other ones we get to see is they like covered a teacher they didn't like's car in shit, and like
uh
I think dog shit. It doesn't matter what kind of shit it is. They covered it in
yeah,
shit.
right. So I was like, wait a minute, okay, hold up. Like, did you actually set a hobo on fire at some point? And you like, part of what's motivating you to do all this good stuff is out of guilt for like some actually horrible shit that you did that normal people would think was horrible. And we're sort of this story is actually sort of like inching up toward admitting that. um Again, like I said earlier, I don't know that I'm like sold on this theory, but I can't shake it, especially just structurally. Feels very intentional how dribbled throughout the story there are these beats of him being like, yeah, and then, me and I forget the kid's name, but you know what I mean. It's very
Yeah.
intentional. It's so, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm quite as conspiracy theoried out on this as you are, but I do think you're absolutely right that there are beats like we have this friend of his that has been established as a bad influence on him and disappeared, not disappeared, moved away at some point. And it's like, oh, thank God this kid moved away because I was heading down a bad path. I think it's interesting every time he does bring up these bad things, like calling in the bomb threat, like covering the teacher's windshield and poop. He always makes sure to be like, I wasn't the one doing it. It wasn't my idea. It was his idea, but I went along with it. And he does
Mhm,
clearly harbor some guilt for this stuff, which I think is perhaps a a good thing ultimately for his character. Um, the place I went with this was not specifically, oh, there's some deep dark thing that Charlie is responsible for that he's hiding. It's more that I'm wondering if this character of his friend will come back in a later point in the story, where that we've established this guy who was like let's say the nega Charlie, like the evil version of Charlie, has moved away now. And perhaps when we get to the world of fairy, he will have also made it to the world of fairy, and will be a bad version of himself. Or maybe, I'm trying desperately to find an inciting incident, right? So I feel like we have established this character as this person who had this very negative influence on Charlie, who he did bad things with, and harbors guilt for that. And we're hitting this beat enough times that it makes me think it is going to matter in some way. And I guess we both had that exact same feeling. It's interesting that we both went different ways with it.
mhm.
Where I was just like, oh, I feel like this guy's going to show up in the story in some way. Because it just feels like it happens too often. Like there's multiple points at the end of chapter 5 where both his father and Bowditch say like how good of a kid he is, how um you know I think Bowditch calls him like a straight arrow or something like that. And he's like, oh, if only he knew about the time when we called in a bomb threat. And it's like, that is not just like an ordinary level of retaining guilt for something. That is seems like a specific defining attribute and characteristic that we're going to pay off in some way later. So I think
Mhm.
I agree with you on that front. I don't think we're being too conspiratorial here, but I
Mhm.
don't know if what we're actually saying is, yeah, they killed a man 3 years ago.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement that this is a setup for something. It's just
Hmm.
and by the way, I also had the thought that maybe this kid is literally going to come back into the picture.
Hmm.
That could be a thing that we're setting up as well.
Yeah.
Um, that yeah, that makes sense. So by saying nega Charlie, you made me stare at the name Charlie for longer than I had before, and remember that the name Charlie does have a negative connotation in the world of Midworld. We have Charlie the Choo Choo,
Hmm.
and we have, which I think is sort of linguistically related within that story to the idea of char and char yu tree.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know. Again, could be totally random. Charlie is just a perfectly fine name, but maybe there's something to it.
Yeah. What I'm desperately trying to remember what char itself meant. Like,
I think it means death.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. Well, not looking good for old Charlie.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I mean, I keep going back to the talisman and like this idea of if this other world that we're traveling to is the territories, is midworld esque, is there going to be like twinner versions of people like there was in the talisman and Black House? Like, are there going to be multiple versions of each character to where we could run into the territories version of his old friend, which is like an exasperated, horrible version of him?
Hmm. Hmm.
That's kind of where my brain went, but I don't know.
Yeah, I like that.
Hmm. Later that day at baseball practice, Charlie is getting pushed around and yelled at by his coach and decides to just up and quit. Matt, what do we think about this? Charlie wants to do this, we see, because he wants more time in his schedule to take care of Radar, but to also help Mr. Bowditch out around the house, like to kind of fulfill his obligations to God in a certain way. Like he sees the grass needs to be mowed, the fence needs to be fixed. There's all these little things he could do around the house, and with his schedule the way it is, he just doesn't have time to do it. And so he pretty dramatically just quits baseball. Are we meant to like say like, good, look, good young man, take this responsibility on and fully commit to it? Or are we meant to be like, it seems very drastic? And this is one of the
Mm.
moments that I was like, oh, surely his father's going to push back on him a little bit here and be like, hey, you're acting kind of crazy right now. Like, I'm
Mhm.
not saying this man doesn't want or need someone to take care, help him out, and I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do so, but it seems like you're acting very rashly around this. And we the part of the reason is he's really fallen in love with Radar. Part of the reason is God speaking to him, but I really just I don't know what the book wants us to think about this, I guess is what
Mhm.
I'll say. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm similarly split, I guess. Like there are some good things you can say about it. Like it feels mature emotionally to say you're treating me like a child, you're yelling at me, you're badgering me. I'm not a child. I'm done with this later. And he
Mhm.
doesn't get angry. It's not like it's a very calm, quick emotional decision, very gunslinger behavior to just be like not going to put up with this shit anymore. Goodbye. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, you could view it as like, well, he's playing sports is kind of a childish thing unless you're like a professional athlete. Grown-ups don't play sports, Matt said. Um, what I mean is like he it feels like closing the door on childhood and walking into this world of like duty and responsibility that he feels he deserves. And which could be seen as bad because it's like, well, hey, you're only 17, like you're allowed to enjoy playing baseball with your friends,
Yeah.
and he just doesn't feel like he deserves it. Like this is one problem with him, by the way. His conscientiousness has a second edge, which is like he doesn't feel like he deserves to just be happy. He feels like he always has to be like earning his existence
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, speaking of the king's view on God, it actually would be extraordinarily fucked up if the greater power in the world like took this kid absolutely begging after losing his mother and his father slowly succumbing to alcoholism, taking this kid absolutely begging for help and being like, haha, here is someone I can use, and just
Yeah.
like making it so he kind of rules his life with this level of obligation. I agree with you, because there is a moment later in the story where Charlie kind of admits to us that he misses playing baseball.
Hmm.
That he kind of wants to play baseball still.
Hmm.
And he like, yes, he doesn't want to put up with the stupid coach who we learn later through his old friend Andy Chen is just kind of a racist asshole. um
Hmm.
like is this like a no good jerk, but like it does feel like he's punishing himself a little bit too much.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think that's part of the makeup
Yeah.
of his character.
Yeah. Because I've been looking for like what is the flaw of Charlie's character. And I think
Hmm.
maybe that's it. Maybe this feeling of, we talk about responsibility, we talk about blame and fault. And Charlie taking the blame for everything. Charlie taking the blame for his mother. Charlie taking the blame for his father. Charlie taking the responsibility of being the person to ensure his father stays on the right path. Like, let's step back here and remove the white and the power of the white on this miracle for his father's recovery. What actually happened was a good soul reached out to a man in need and helped him get better. And then through the hard, diligent work of Charlie's father, he stayed off the wagon,
Hmm.
on the wagon. He didn't drink. Um, and so like it is really we haven't talked about the larger metaphor of this, which is just like how a child feels responsible for their parent in this regard. Like he was responsible for his dad when he was drinking because he had to be the one to remember to get the food. He had to be the one to remember, oh, you left a thing in the oven for too long, which echoed Mr. Mercedes perfectly, by the way.
Hmm.
um he had the responsibility to take care of his dad in that regard. And now, even as his dad gets better, you're the child of an addict, you still feel this responsibility. I have to keep them going. I have to make sure, it is my responsibility to make sure that they remain on this path, which is way more responsibility than any child ever deserves, or even frankly has, right? The responsibility in this lies solely with George Reed. He is the one that is responsible for keeping himself going. It is not his son's responsibility, but Charlie feels that. He feels that overwhelmingly.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's exactly it. That's why he's so conscientious. He learned at a very young age that he is the only person he can rely on, and then he sort of developed like his own metaphysics around this of like, well,
Yeah.
the universe runs on the goodwill, which is itself powered by me being a good Samaritan and doing what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
Um,
I am
yeah.
curious what the metaphor will be then if that ends up being textually true, as it seems to be. Like God saying, no, no, actually, I did do this, and now you will do this for me. Um, how does that complicate the metaphor we've just crafted here?
Good question. We'll we'll find out.
I want to talk about this part really quick, Matt. It says, I got the mail out of Mr. Bowditch's box. Nothing personal, just the usual dandruff. Hey, that's not a phrase that I've ever heard uttered ever in the history of the world. Which
uh,
which brings me to a larger point and question. One of the things I've heard a complaint about this book and a complaint about modern King in general, and we've talked about this before, is the way he writes children. Matt, does Charlie talk like a 17-year-old would talk in 2013? Now, granted, we were not 17 in 2013. We were 27?
yeah.
So, 20, yeah, 27.
No.
So
Yeah.
we were about 10 years older than Charlie when this book takes place. But does Charlie talk like a 17-year-old? Does any child in this book talk like a child? And if the answer is no, is that bothering you at all?
Well, it's not. I mean, so for one thing, I don't know that I even thought about this, but if the book is being written by an older person
Yeah,
reflecting back on his youth, then I don't necessarily expect it to be. But even so, I see Charlie as a kind of textually world weary old soul
sure.
who has just been through a lot, and so um, I'm never really bothered. Yeah, I personally was never bothered by any of the language choices.
Yeah, I'm not either. But one of the things that when I thought about this, that I thought was an interesting thing is that I feel like this book could take place in any decade. Like there's there's moments in these chapters that they specifically reference YouTube and cell phones, right? And that put it firmly in the year it's set in. But like if you close your eyes and cut that stuff out of it, like Charlie could easily be a kid of the 60s, of the 50s, of the 70s, of the 80s, of the 90s. Like there's nothing there's nothing really specific to the cultural moment of this time that requires any of this. To me, Charlie feels almost timeless. And does he talk like a kid of an appropriate decade? I mean, no, maybe, but I don't care. And I think it is a very good point to say that this is the structure of the story is this is an older man looking back on
Yeah,
an experience. So when he's writing the dialogue of the kids, he's not going to write no cap on God.
right. I don't know how. I mean, okay, we could go all over the place here, but like, first of all, people in books don't talk the way people talk anyway.
Yeah, true.
So
Nobody does. Yeah.
doesn't so they definitely don't talk the way 17-year-olds talk, because there would be 5 million times as many likes and you know just nonsense. And like, also, I don't know. Like, did kids in the the uh uh ugh, Narnia books, like, was that how kids talked back then, or was that just how you know the author wanted
Yeah.
them to, right? I don't know. This is not a thing that has ever bothered me. I just sort of go into the bookland, and in bookland, I don't care. I don't care how people talk. I don't expect it to be
hmm
realistic.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I also think the thing that people mean when they say this is actually like a character said something that they found so distracting and off-putting that it put them out of the story. That's really all they mean. Because yeah, I don't think it is so nebulous and difficult to define what like talking like a kid of the generation means. And usually it's just like I'm reading along and a 13-year-old used a word from the 50s and I'm like, whoa, that doesn't make sense. But honestly, who cares? Who cares?
right.
So while walking Radar out in the backyard, the two of them approach the shed for the first time. And Matt, by this point in the story, the shed has just been so like focused on that like it is this like we know it is like the source and place of everything. So the second we move toward the shed, I think you sit up in your chair a little bit and are
Mhm.
like, oh, here we go. Here we go. And we see this. From behind the door came a scratching, followed by a weird chittering noise that stood up the hair on the back of my neck. Not an animal sound. I've never heard anything exactly like it. Radar barked, then whined, then backed away with her belly still on the ground. Matt, what is in the shed? What
So
is
you
it?
say it in that voice. That's the voice you use when you know what's in the shed, but you don't know. You don't know.
I I don't know.
I'm enjoying this.
I don't know what's
Um,
in the shed.
it's funny because chittering and also not an animal sound almost lands as like a contradiction for me, because what chitters if not animals?
hmm
The only thing that chitters that could chitter and not be an animal would be like a robot, which is possible. Just robots in mid-world. But it's very weird. Like I don't know, what is that? What does that conjure for you? What image does that conjure?
A chittering
A chittering, yeah.
like a bird.
But it specifically says not an animal sound.
Yeah,
So
I mean, okay. So,
yeah,
by the way, you look up chitter in the dictionary, and you're like, "Thanks, dictionary." The the definition is make a twittering or chattering sound. Oh, okay. And twittering is bird. Chattering is like they're animal sounds. They're 100%
yeah,
animal sounds. I think that is as you said, like intentionally done to make you feel
Mhm.
uncomfortable, because it is like describing a sound to describe an animal and then saying it's not animalistic. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I mean, so before I thought analytically about it, the first thing that popped into my mind was some horrible little um uh Henderson goblin creature.
Okay.
Um that was what I saw in my like imagination. Do I think that's what it's going to be? I don't know, but that's what that description conjures to mind.
I like it. Um, yeah, I mean, well, and I guess like we've already kind of decided that we think the shed itself is a portal, or the threshold, or the path to Narnia, or whatever it is. So is this thing that we're hearing in there just like something that wandered into the path and got stuck, and that's why when he returns to the shed multiple times, always to, by the way, just like beat the shit out of the shed to try to scare away anything that's in there, has it just gone back through to either side, or are we just completely wrong on here, and this is just Bowditch is keeping something locked in here, something from this other world, that he sees as dangerous and is keeping it locked in. I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny to me how aligned we are in this because we didn't talk about this at all. But I was definitely thinking the first thing where it's like a doorway and
Yeah.
maybe there's something that either lives on the other side and occasionally comes into the portal and scratches on the inside of the shed and then goes back. But you're totally right that it could be the second thing and he just has a thing locked in there.
Yeah,
um
I mean, I try to like build up the idea of Bowditch as a guardian, and perhaps Radar as a guard dog, right?
mhm.
But then also like I think we're it is so more difficult like processing the stuff and being like, I don't want to overthink things. I pity you so much, Matt. I haven't had to do this for 5 years, and now suddenly like, because like the moment where he comes back in the middle of the night, and Radar is like so excited to see him, but in like a very specific kind of way, where he's like he it scares the shit out of him, and then he like
Uh-huh.
makes sure that the dog door is closed from then on. It's like Radar is afraid of not just being alone, which I think it certainly is that, but like there's something dangerous. Maybe it's
Yeah.
in the shit. Like I don't know. There's something going on here,
Yeah.
and I don't see the shape of it yet.
It's quite compelling and playing on my emotions really strongly right now to like realize that this dog almost certainly can hear and smell like and like knows exactly what's going on in that shed and finds it absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And it probably is something that would just melt your mind if you knew it was there, and the dog always knows it's
Mhm.
there. Uh, so that sucks.
Yeah, it does. Hopefully, we find out soon. It's
Yeah.
driving me crazy. So Charlie, at the end of this chapter, hears from his father that a local magazine wants to interview him about how he helped out Bowditch. Charlie is reluctant, but agrees as kind of a concession to his dad, that this might ultimately be good for getting the scholarships he so desperately needs.
Yeah, and that is how kids these days think. So
Yeah.
it's realistic.
Is this Matt versus the modern generation
Yeah,
statement?
although I kind of feel like it was our generation too, to be honest. So
It's just, yeah, all of them.
yeah.
All right, chapter 4, which, by the way, we moved so quickly from chapter 2 to chapter 3. I don't think I ever said chapter 3, but we're on
Yeah.
chapter 4 now. We have visiting Mr. Bowditch, Andy Chen, the cellar, and other news, and a hospital meeting. And by the way, we're going to have to accelerate a little bit here because we're taking longer on. So here, as I just say, we're going to accelerate. I'm now going to halt the show to give a little inside baseball. It's very easy for me, Matt, when looking through these chapters on a book I've read before, to go, I can cut that out. I know
Uh-huh.
that's not anything that builds to something larger, and we don't need to talk about it unless Matt really wants to. I can't do that anymore. And so the script was longer than our scripts have been in a long time. It's just because I'm pulling too much information because I don't know what matters and what doesn't. So apologies, everyone. I know you probably are excited to hear that, but apologies. This is gonna, as I settle into this new normal, we're gonna see some a little bit longer episodes.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
All right, Matt, chapter 4. Our chapter begins with Charlie once again heading to feed Radar. He then plays around the living room a bit, clearly getting more and more comfortable, pushing the boundaries in the house. He turns on the old tube TV and is shocked to find out that it works. So this immediately sent me Googling, Matt, because I'm pretty sure that it's been over 10 years since the United States just stopped transmitting TV signals over analog. If you want to get a signal on like an old TV with rabbit ears, you need a digital converter box because the signal doesn't come in analog without being converted to digital anymore. And I'm pretty sure that happened I'm pretty sure it happened in like 2009, right? So the question here is, did King just make an oops, or is this like a magical fairy TV?
It's definitely a magical fairy TV. Or there's a thinny in the shed that goes to the past and he got the tubes from the past. That's a novel idea.
Sure. But even if you had working vacuum tubes in your TV, you would have to be getting the analog signal from the past because it's all digital now.
Yeah, I mean, that just seems like an oopsie. I don't know that I even knew that they aren't transmitting analog signals anymore. I mean, you're probably right. I just never thought about it.
Yeah, every TV, if it's an older TV, you need a box. All the cable companies gave you a converter box for the signal.
Yeah, it makes sense.
All right, so magical fairy TV, check. Charlie heads back to the hospital now to show Bowditch some more pictures of his dog and finds out that he's been assigned as the old man's emergency contact, which is just like the saddest thing ever.
Yeah,
it's so sad.
it is. I agree.
And his visit with Bowditch, a prickly, in pain Bowditch, who we learn has an external fixator on his leg, which is just as gnarly as it sounds. There's things outside the leg holding the bone in place inside the leg, and you have like what's described as bicycle spokes sticking out of your leg.
Yeah.
Like, oh.
Yeah. It's horrible.
The point is though that the recovery time is going to be a long time, and this makes the dynamic between the dog and the two men a little bit more complicated because they have to figure out what we're going to do for the long run, right? And that's kind of what we do here. And I love this setup of these two characters that are clearly both hiding things from each other. Bowditch is hiding whatever the fuck's going on in his house in a shed from Charlie, but Charlie is kind of hiding the true motivation behind all these actions and why he wants to help him out and why he's so invested in this. He's hiding this from Bowditch. And so we've created this dynamic where these two characters are in this constant tension of hiding things from each other. And I find it really engaging for sure.
Yeah, me too. It's much more engaging than if Bowditch was just like a kindly old man who, had no secrets. He seems like somebody who's been laboring under a painful burden of some kind his whole life, which is kind of plays into this idea of him as this guardian.
Yeah, he's a man of many mysteries, and I agree. Some of them is that he has this great burden upon him. There's this moment at the end of this, by the way, where it says, I kept thinking of something he'd said while we were talking about the ladder. Goddamn doctors with their goddamn bad news. Probably he'd just been talking about how long it would take his goddamn leg to goddamn heal, and maybe having a goddamn physical therapist, probably a goddamn snoop in the bargain in the house. But I wondered. So, what do you think that is?
It's cancer.
Interesting.
Yes, cancer.
See, I thought this was actually representing a thing in Bowditch's past.
The bad news.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
At some point, like he's got a thing about doctors and a thing about doctors' bad news because he got some bad news from a doctor years before, perhaps about someone that was not him.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because the idea that Bowditch is now going to die of some illness, kind of, I don't see how that hangs together quite as well now that I'm thinking about it. Whereas it does act as a perfect lead in to some, or not lead in necessarily, but framing or preparation for some later story that we'll hear where he tells us about his past. So I changed my mind. I think you're right.
Yeah. I did want to talk as we leave the hospital about this conversation with Charlie's friend, Andy Chen, who shows up at his house on request of the baseball coach, desperately trying to bring Charlie back on the team on the team. This is, we learn Andy Chen is one of Charlie's closest friends when he was younger. It was kind of him, uh, Andy, and then the other boy whose name I didn't copy down. I don't remember. But the troublemaker, the no good Nick.
Yeah.
Uh, and I just want to mention this because this is kind of going back to what we talked about earlier about Charlie's age. He's 17 now. He's not 11. He's not 12. He's not 13. And Andy is a friend of Charlie from that time in his life when he was 11, 12, 13. He's a close friend in so many of these coming of age stories that King has written in the past. These are the guys he's now drifted apart from, and that's what we see here. That he and Andy used to be thick as thieves, and they don't really hang out very much anymore. In fact, I think it says like Andy knocked on his back door for the first time in a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think we're doing something very specific here with it's not just Andy coming over to give us some exposition about how the coach is racist and calls him like, what does he call him? Like yellow something. He's Asian and he calls him some Asian slur or something. But that's not just about that, and it's not just about establishing their friendship. It's talking about he's this time in his life where these friendships are starting to fade, and drift away from each other. Like, I don't know what more to do with that other than just to bring it up.
Yeah, connecting to the idea that he's leaving the baseball team too. He's leaving behind his childhood and becoming an adult and the responsibility, all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. One more. Sorry. Back at Bowditch's, Charlie explores the cellar, and this is one of the most. So we haven't talked specifically about the writing very much today, but I think the writing of this book is just the prose very strong, and even if it is maybe geared more towards like the YA type of book, this part, Matt, there was something sad about it. He's talking about the half-completed puzzle he finds in the basement. I couldn't express the reason for that sadness then, but I'm older now and I think I can. It was about the jigsaw, but it was also the antique TV and the hall of old reading matter. It was about an elderly man's solitary pursuits, and the dust on the folding chair, on the books and magazines, suggested that even those were winding down. The only thing in the cellar that looked like they were used regularly were the washer and dryer. Just, I mean, the concept of your hobbies, your pursuits winding down as you enter a new phase in the final phase in your life, I feel like is just so poetically horrifying to me, and I loved it.
Yeah, 100%. I and further, I concur that the prose in this book is just extremely solid and sure, and feels pleasant to be read aloud.
And then and then just to set our flags worrying, Matt, Bowditch tells Charlie, "You're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." And I just feel like, so okay, the way this all plays out is he tells him that, he says, "I'm going to trust you. I can't see any choice." Then he runs to his dad and says, "I told Dad what he'd said about me being the best thing that had happened to him, but not about the trusting part. Some instinct made me hold that back. Dad gave me a strong one-armed hug and kissed my cheek and said he was proud of me. That was a good day." That makes me go, well, if that means there can be bad days, right? Like, I feel like, I don't know, I got the very strong vibe at about this point in the story, Matt, that the end of this thing is going to be sad. I just feel like we're going to end on a sad note again in the Stephen King story.
Yeah. Right. At this point, unfortunately, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of how it goes. Like I feel like we've been on a tear of just shitting on us at the end of the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. I think bad things are going to happen. I think people are going to die. I don't even know. It's funny. I've changed my mind since my first cut at the script, because I was thinking that maybe his dad would die like soon and he would be an orphan when he goes on his adventure. Now I'm thinking more along the lines of his dad stays around to sort of provide a element of like tension and, potential conflict of like, well, you don't, your dad needs to be alive for you to have, for there to be a risk that you're going to disappoint him or something. But yeah, I don't know. I do keep thinking like we're perhaps reconstructing elements of a fairy tale. So we have, the mysterious old witch or wizard, the
Yeah.
mysterious doorway, you know child who has lost a parent, animal companion. I know we kind of already talked about this, but like as we're getting toward the end of the chapter, I feel the urge to sort of draw these ideas back into this constellation of that fantasy story slash fairy tale story
Yeah.
that we're building.
No, I think you're right there. I don't think Charlie's father is going to die, but I do wonder if Charlie's father will be imperiled in some way. Like what? Like I would feel a bit disappointed if the inciting incident is just God saying, "Hey, you owe me this. Go on this fairy adventure," and there's not some sort of actual incident that forces Charlie across that threshold. And it seems
Mhm.
like it would most likely be related to either Bowditch or his father, or perhaps both at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah, or maybe he's just so damn conscientious that he's the one person in the world who doesn't need an inciting incident. He's just like, okay,
Could be. Could be. No no need to reject the call in this one. This guy's
yeah,
gonna just immediately accept the call for sure.
yeah, yeah.
All right, so Bowditch puts Charlie not only as his like emergency contact, but also as his recovery plan as he prepares to be released from the hospital. And so Charlie and his father are called into a meeting with Mrs. Ravensburger. Miss
Love it.
Mrs. Ravensburger. What a fucking name that is.
It's amazing.
She works at the hospital and wants to discuss Mr. Bowditch's recovery plan. And I think, thinking of this scene, Matt, like a fun way to approach this scene between this woman that works for the hospital and a 17-year-old boy is like try to think of this whole situation from her perspective. You have this angry old agoraphobic man who is like miserable, doesn't want to be there, wants to go home. He's saying, "Don't worry, I got it. I'm going to have someone take care of me." And it's like, "Really? Who?" And he's like, "This child. I met him 3 days ago."
Uh-huh.
And you're just like, What?
Uh-huh.
Wait. What? So like I think looking at this whole thing from her perspective, I think makes a lot of sense. Like she's mostly talking to George Reed at the beginning here, right? Because she's like, "You are the adult. Do you understand what your son is doing? And are you cool with this, Dad? Are you okay with this?" And George basically stays silent throughout the entire conversation. This is another one of those instances where I was like, is this a reflection of him just being a great parent who understands the right place to intervene and to push and prod and help? Or is he just like afraid to take a stance in front of his kid because of the guilt he feels for putting it? The more I think about it, the more I think it's just the former. But this is just another place that thought occurred to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so interesting how many of these issues this week I can totally see it both ways. Like I
Mm-hmm.
feel part of me feels like I'm going to come off as wishy-washy because it's like, man, just take a stand. Do you think it's good or do you think it's bad? And I'm like, I don't know that parenting really has a lot of easy choices once a certain point is passed. I think a lot of parenting is like, well, this is going to be good for them in the long run but maybe hurt right now,
Mm-hmm.
or like maybe every once in a while you're like, this is going to be good right now but maybe bad for them in the long run. And you're never sure what side of that line to stay on, and you're never really sure about anything in general. So it makes it hard for me to really come down too hard on his behavior here, but I do see what you're gesturing at, obviously, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the uncertainty over whether he's just the best dad in the world or he's actually just kind of a weak guy.
Yeah.
The book allows both interpretations.
Yeah. I'm interested to see where this goes.
Mhm.
Of note here, though, Matt, is Melissa Wilcox, who is Mr. Bowditch's young, blonde, very pretty physical therapist. And we get this little interaction to close our chapter. Melissa followed us out into the hall, seeming to glide in her blinding white sneakers. "LSU?" I asked. She looked surprised. "How'd you know?" "The notebook." "Basketball?" She smiled. "And volleyball." Given her height, I bet she had a hell of a smash. "Oh, Charlie, My boy.
Oh, Charlie. Is this King making a joke or is this Charlie making a joke?
Yes.
The audiobook reader read this line in the most guileless imaginable fashion. Whereas I definitely in my own head would have read it as like, oh, Charlie wants to experience that smash.
I
Um,
mean, almost certainly, right?
yeah, 100%. So,
It's so funny though, because I totally think we're setting up some Melissa Wilcox stuff
mhm.
that's going to go down in the future. Um, she's a college student. He's, you know, he's 17, not quite an adult, but close enough, right?
Yeah.
I think there is something we're setting up here, and like part of my reaction to that is like, well, how's that going to work? Because he's going to the fairy realm. Like, what is he like? If he's going to have this whole thing with his old friends going to come back, and then also like we've guessed might happen, and also now we have going to have this ongoing relationship with the physical therapist that might spin up into something possibly, maybe, I don't know. It's like, when is he going to fairyland? When is that going to happen? It's one of those things that makes me scratch my head about whether I've just gotten this whole thing wrong.
Or are we going to skip a bunch of time? You know,
Yeah,
are we
yeah,
going
could
to
be.
is he going to go away and then come back and time will have passed? I mean, I don't know. We had an old dog on our hands,
Mm-hmm.
so that there's an intrinsic timetable. I feel, but
So this
I,
is another unanswerable question for me, because my running assumption right now is that when Charlie steps into the shed and is transported to Fairy World, that Radar will be coming with him.
mhm,
However, Radar is very old and cannot walk great distances. And if we're going on a grand adventure in the world of fairy, I'm assuming there's going to be a decent amount of travel. And so my assumption here has to be that in the land of fairy, Radar becomes a young, spry version of herself for
mhm.
this theory to work. I don't know why that would be. I don't know how that makes sense metaphorically or thematically with what we're doing in the book at all, but it just seems to be that has to be the case. Um, but I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, honestly, I think there's a bunch of assumptions there, which you're aware of,
Yes.
right? Like well, I mean, and but part of what's funny about it is that I share some of them. Like I do think that he's going to go into the other world, and I do think that Radar is going to be with him. Um, but I guess maybe I'm more open minded to when that happens or what that looks like. So, I mean, for all we know, Radar is a dude in the fairy world, right? Like I don't know. I have no idea. Um,
I think that could be. I kind of hope not, because I kind of want this to remain a boy and his dog story.
yeah, yeah,
And if his dog is just like like colloquially like, "What's up, dog?" I think
yeah.
that would ruin it a bit for me.
Right. Or even if it was like Wolf, where Wolf was a dude,
Yeah.
but I don't just want that again. And I don't think King would do that, you know.
No.
Um
It's so funny I didn't even think about that until just now
yeah.
that was a possibility. But yeah, that aligns so closely. It certainly could be. I hope not, and I don't think so. Um,
Yeah.
but we'll see.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, at last we are on the final chapter of the week, chapter 5, My Father's Pipe, A Call from Mr. Bowditch, and the Flower Canister. We pick up right where we left off, with Charlie and his dad heading to the store to buy some things necessary to take care of Mr. Bowditch. Charlie agreed he's going to take upon this responsibility, and that involves possibly spending the night over there for several days on his spring break, and also having to buy a bunch of stuff and set a bunch of stuff up, and do a lot of like adult activities to take care of this man, including like helping him to the bathroom, possibly changing him, right? Like, this is incredible responsibility he's just taken on here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just really I mean, I think he does know what he's getting into, but on the other hand, can he possibly, like at his age? But
Yeah.
he's gonna do it. We'll see.
It completely makes sense why his dad is having trouble processing like the why of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so from here, Charlie now feels like he's a little bit more authorized to explore more of Bowditch's house, and he does so. He finds water damage on his leather-bound books from a leaky roof, which just makes me want to kill myself, Matt. That the idea of some very fine leather-bound books being water damaged, that just is awful.
Uh
I also love
huh.
I also love this little detail that up in his room we find not the nice leather-bound display books, but instead the genre stuff, like the the kind of trashy genre stuff that everyone reads and loves, but we're not going to put those on our bookshelves. Those are going to stay up in my room. I love that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. That's a very realistic touch. Yes.
Yep, yep. I also really love this. There were two books on his bed table, a paperback called Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, and a thick hardcover tome titled The Origins of Fantasy and Its Place in the World Matrix, Jungian Perspectives. On the cover was a funnel filling with stars. Um, so Matt, have you ever read The Origin of Fantasy and Its Place in the World Matrix?
Oh, several times.
Gotcha. Doesn't exist.
Oh my
Doesn't
God.
exist. It's not a real book. It's not a real book, which makes you think it matters more, right? Like,
Yeah, right. Well, actually, that's a fantastic point, right? Because just like mentioning Ray Bradbury, you're like, yeah, of course, Stephen King would put Ray Bradbury on this guy's shelves to
yeah.
show that he's a learned and well-read man. But specifically, uh, stuff that references Jungian psychology and fantasy and uh, merging fairy stories. It's like, yeah, okay. He's studying, he's trying to find out what's going on with this weird portal in his shed,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And to be clear, I'm not. I'm sorry. Apologies. I'm not well versed in Jungian psychology here, but my very elementary understanding is that it's all about kind of unlocking how the subconscious kind of pushes you in certain ways and not, and like how to like get a handle on the ways your subconscious is driving you, and bringing that stuff to your consciousness. Is that a decent summary?
That's it's definitely not an area that I have studied particularly. I think everything you just said is directionally correct. Um, I don't consider myself somebody who has any authority to speak about it. Although it might be something for us to look into as we go into this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't feel like this is just a throwaway reference, especially because of the fact that he just made up a nonfiction book for this.
Yeah,
I love
one thing that does jump
the
to my mind
world
though is like
matrix.
when one important part of Jungian psychotherapy is the idea of the shadow as being like sort of the unacceptable part of yourself.
Hmm,
And the shadow and the idea of twinners and the idea of like
interesting.
the territories sort of feels vaguely related to me. It's funny, neither of us has quite said the word the territories,
Yeah.
or maybe you did actually, but I didn't. And I didn't really think the word either. But it's like this is just as likely to be the territories as it is midworld, right?
The only reason why I don't think that, and this is entirely extra textual, but like I feel like if King had written a territories book, I just would have heard that from
Hmm.
people a lot more. That if it's like specifically a pseudo sequel to his Straub work, I feel
Hmm.
like that would have been in the conversation, especially when Peter Straub passed away, and especially when King has kind of talked about if there will ever be a third book in that series or not. I feel like I just would have like osmosisly absorbed the fact that this was a book that takes place in that same general world, and the fact that I haven't tends to push me towards it not, but that's completely extra textual and could still be completely wrong, so I don't know.
You and I are going insane together. I love it.
I know. This is like this is what happens. This is what we did this on Ward for 2 years.
Yeah, we did.
Um, so Charlie gets home and it's time for his dad to have the talk with him. He's even got out his his talking pipe. Matt, I just like, this is the type of thing that I love when King does, is that we have this it's not just enough that he's going to have this kind of talk with his son, but he has to build up this whole backstory of this pipe that he adopted when he quit smoking, and then he eventually put away, but it's the thing he takes out anytime he's going to have a serious conversation. So now the pipe's out, so we know the conversation is serious. It's just like details that ultimately don't matter. Like the scene would have essentially played the same way if he just said, "Up, I got home, my dad had a conversation with me, and here's how the conversation went." But like, it's that kind of like, I just love the detail of this pipe.
Yeah. Makes it real.
Mm-hmm.
I got to get me a talking pipe. That's immediately struck me as necessary.
I think King's also working out some of his frustrations with like how pipes work, because in the middle of this, it's just like, man, this pipe sucks.
Yeah.
It always burns out.
Yeah. I used to have a tobacco pipe, and I had the same experience with it. That it actually sucked, and then my mom found it in its drawer where it lived in my house,
Mm-hmm.
and then it mysteriously disappeared, and I never saw it again.
Huh. Did
Yeah,
she decide you don't need to have a pipe, and
yeah.
therefore
I was an adult when this happened. Yes, my
parents never stop parenting, Matt? This is just true.
I think you're right.
So the talk, Matt, I mean, like the way we've set it up with like the talking pipe, you expect this is going to be maybe more of an argument, maybe more of a conflict between his father and him. But again, like everything else we talked about this week, George is like just kind of, "Hey, son, this is a little weird. Do you know what you're getting into? There's something you're not telling me here, and I'm acknowledging that." But again, like he's very not conflict driven. Like he does not want to get in a fight with his son. He's just kind of being like, "Hey, what's going on?"
Yeah.
I should probably meet this guy at some point. If you're going to be like sleeping over at his house and spending your entire spring break helping him, and then also into the summer, like come on, man, let's. And I really like his dad for this moment. Like there's a less skilled parent who could turn this into a giant argument, right? And I think George Reed navigates this pretty great, while at the same time not really confronting him about anything.
Yeah, I think that, as you say, he's just baffled by it. Actually, he's just
Yeah.
like, why? Like, I'm fine with it. I just need to understand what your motivations are, and like, because this is not a thing that a normal kid would do. And I
Yeah.
think he knows that his kid is not a normal kid, but he still doesn't understand why. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's good. I think this is a solid dad move right here.
I think it also kind of does tap into his guilt in some ways, because he talks to his sponsor and is like, I mean, he said, my sponsor said that like with me and my addiction, like you had to kind of become a caretaker, and perhaps this with Mr. Bowditch is just you like in that caretaker mindset, just leaping into being a caretaker of someone else. And so he's saying, so what he's essentially saying without saying it is this my fault? Is this because of me? And the funny thing is, kinda, right? Like, I mean, not in the as a direct subconscious of a way as George is thinking, but essentially yes, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right.
Mm-hmm. The conversation also allows us to revisit the mystery of Bowditch, right? We've been getting all these kind of clues about this. Who is this person? He doesn't seem to come from anywhere, Matt. He's like, we don't have any records of him. We have just like one name of the man who bought the house, which is not named the same, is a Bowditch, but not this Bowditch. Where does his money come from? Like, maybe we'll get some of the answers to these questions, but we're being intrigued about this, perhaps being, I guess it's fun when I just get to guess with you, because like maybe he doesn't come from this world, right? Maybe he comes from that other world, and that's why he has, there's no record of him existing here.
Yeah, and he just has a bunch of gold that he's been selling for cash over the years.
Yeah. So while Charlie is over at Bowditch's cleaning up, the old man calls him on the phone and asks if he can keep secrets. And this is where we get a lot of the beats you were talking about here at the end of the chapter, of like, he immediately thinks about the secrets he's been keeping from his father when he called in a bomb threat.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and other such events. So
This
he's like, yeah,
is
I can keep secrets. Look at all these secrets I've been keeping.
yeah. Been keeping secrets from the reader too.
I don't know about that, Matt. I don't know. Charlie agrees finally that he can keep a secret, and Bodish promises him that they'll talk the next day, and he's going to reveal some of his secrets to him. But first, he tells him he's going to need to iron out his pay, and we decide that not only is he going to repay him for everything that he's purchased so far, the dog food and all the supplies, but he's going to give him $500 a week, which is pretty good chunk of change, especially for a 17-year-old.
Yeah. I mean, you turn that into a monthly salary figure. It's not too shabby at all. Yeah.
No. He tells him to open the flower pot and grab some money out of there, and inside he finds a lot of money. A lot. Maybe $8,000 cash and also some gold nuggets, possibly.
Hmm.
Matt, we didn't talk about this at the time, but there was a moment where he was helping Bowditch where he says, go grab some money. It's in the flower. And then he stops himself and says, no, that's empty. There's nothing in the flower pot. Don't look in there. And Charlie never actually does.
Mm.
And so, like, there's two different interpretations of this. And again, we're driving ourselves crazy. The first interpretation is he just doesn't trust Charlie yet and is not going to tell them there's $8,000 in the flower pot because he thinks he's going to steal it, right?
Hmm.
The second interpretation is it's a magic flower pot and was actually empty at the time, but is now magically filled up with more money because of fairy magic. I'm
Interesting.
driving myself insane here, actually.
I
I
love
think
this.
it's probably just because he didn't trust him yet, but who the fuck knows?
Yeah, I assumed it's because he didn't trust him yet, but I love, I love where your head goes.
I mean,
I love your head goes to magic flower pots and my head goes to our protagonist is actually a giant piece of shit.
we're so alike, but so different. I mean, look, the money in the flower pot is tagged with like bank like tags on it, so it clearly just comes from the bank. It's not like
Uh-huh.
magic summoned money, but
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I'm grabbing everything and
Yeah.
reaching for it.
No, I think he just didn't trust him yet. But another thing, one of these sort of marks in Charlie's favor is that there's not, any thought that passes through his head here that's like, I could just take a couple of these wads. He would
Yeah,
notice.
he probably wouldn't notice,
Right.
but he doesn't. You're right. You're right. That's why he's not a lying piece of shit, Matt.
Yeah. Except that he's writing the story from the future. So,
Charlie goes home, tells his dad about the windfall, but he does hide just how much money there was in the pot. That's something he does keep to himself. So we have established throughout the course of the show that hiding information from important loved ones or your quartet or something is in the universe of Stephen King bad, right?
mhm.
Characters do it, they get punished for it, things splinter, bad things happen. Do you think that's the case here? And the reason I'm asking this is because I do kind of think there is like a trope of these sort of fairy tale type stories where the children live in this world where the fairy is existing and possible, and this is a thing they kind of keep from the adults. This is a thing that adults don't get to be part of. And so part of me was like, oh, he's lying to people, not good. But part of me was like, oh, this is just how we do fairy tale. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, part of my answer to that is that he's not actually a child. Like to me, there's there, there's nothing wrong with just not telling people information, especially in a situation where it's really unclear how that could be bad. Like, how could it be? Well, okay. I guess part of you is like, why would a guy have all this cash sitting around unless there was something kind of untoward going on? But it's like, well, he's an old man. He just has cash. What's the problem? So I guess basically my point is like, why is it harmful to hold that secret back? And I guess it's just building this wedge of distrust, and the expectation that he's going to withhold things from his father is the actual problem here. And building that distance between himself and his father, which I think is part of the like growing up and leaving the house process,
Yeah.
is like you stop. And maybe he never did fully trust his father because his father let him down so much.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. It's kind of a scattershot answer, but
That's fair. I ultimately do think the part that matters is just that for whatever reason he does feel like he can't divulge this kind of information to his dad. Um,
yeah.
why? I don't know, but he feels like he cannot.
Yeah, I mean, it made more sense to me earlier when he said when he withheld that Bowditch had said, I've decided to trust you," because for me that was like, well, Bowditch is going to trust him with something, and Charlie, whatever that's going to be, Charlie wants to be the gatekeeper of whether that information passes on to
Yeah,
his
yeah.
dad. So
I mean, perhaps this is just what you said. Is it like keeping this amount of money in your flour jar is suspicious and untoward, and like a reasonable person would hear that and go, "Hey, maybe."
uh-huh.
Maybe don't hang out with this guy anymore. That makes me a little nervous. He's keeping $8,000 in his flour.
Uh-huh.
I'm no longer comfortable with this arrangement. But it felt like something more than that. It felt like something that like this is part of the fair. Like anything that seems like part or tangential to the fairy of it all, it seems like he wants to keep his father out of it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
All right, and that is where the chapter ends. By the way, there was another horrifying thought that occurred to me, which is that Bowditch is going to end up dead, like right before um, Charlie went to him to reveal all the secrets of where he comes from and all these great mysteries. And
Uh-huh.
that thought horrified me so much. And I was like, "Don't do that, Steven. Don't promise to give us some of our answers in the very next chapter, and then he died before he could give us the answers." I would be so upset.
Well, that could happen. I don't think that's going to happen, first of all, because I think that this is the scene where Bowditch tells us all the story. We hear the story of Bowditch.
Hmm.
But even if that were to happen, I feel like then we would have sort of the fun of Charlie exploring the house and figuring out the mysteries for himself, which would also be its own kind of fun.
That's fair. I like that. That calms my nerves a little bit here.
Good.
All right, but that is finally the end of the episode. We will try to make these a little bit shorter going forward for our sakes and yours. But that was our first foray into fairy tale. I think you guys can see the vibe is going to be a little bit different on this one. A little bit, both of us driving ourselves insane instead of just Matt. Maybe you'll enjoy this more. I don't know. I hope so. It's definitely different, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm enjoying this book. I'm enjoying these talks a whole lot.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Next week, as we said, we are going to continue with chapters 6 through 10 of the novel, another 5 chapters, and hopefully we're in fairy by the end of it. We'll see.
I hope so too.
All right, Matt. We do have a discussion question this week. What is the discussion question we're going to be asking?
Very simply, what is your favorite fairy tale?
Could be classic. Could be modern. And you get to define what fairy tale is, right? Like you don't have to use Tolkien's definition.
Absolutely. I and why, if you don't mind adding that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
They better not mind.
Yeah.
All right, that is it for us here this week. As we said, we continue next week with chapters 6 through 10 of Fairy Tale.
That's right. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, on Twitter at kingslingerspod, and over on the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia.
And make sure you head over to doofmedia.myshopify.com for all the latest available merch. We still have everything you've seen and loved. The propagating of the time wave, it's just banger, man. It's just absolutely banger. I also got the other mug, the Bliss Orb mug, and I love it so much. I love it all so much. It's all great stuff. Plenty of fun things, plenty of stickers and shirts and mugs and all the good stuff. The Kingslingers is going away. Flanagan's Wake will be taking its place, but you can commemorate your time with Kingslingers with a, a podcast me mug. I still can't get over how this is our best-selling item by far. This silly little this
so
silly
stupid
little thing. It's so stupid and yet so wonderful.
Yeah, I love it. But yeah, if you like Kingslingers and you want to support us in our current and future endeavors, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. You'll get access to cool bonus podcasts like the episode of Freeman Bros that me and my brother dropped last week, and the episode of Castle Talk that me and Scott are going to be dropping in the next week approximately.
Yeah, I think it should be next week, hopefully.
Where we talk about the next 2 episodes of the very good television series Castle Rock.
I also, Matt, have been thinking about what we're going to do after we finish Castle Rock for our bonus podcast, and I do have a couple ideas I want to run by you. I will not tell the listeners that until you have said yay or nay, but I just wanted to say that here because I just want to let you folks know that after we finish Castle Rock, we hopefully will be continuing with some sort of monthly bonus content for our patron users for sure.
Yeah.
But of course, we understand that not everyone can be a member of Patreon, and that's absolutely okay. There's still tons of ways to help us out. Please continue sharing Kingslingers. Even after we're done, we still want new people to find the show, and they do that through your help, so please do it. And please also continue leaving us rating and reviews. This week's Spotlight review comes from Zar Kara, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Here I am at the end of season 2 and realizing I'm not going to catch up before the show ends. This is a wonderful examination of all things King and even made me read some books I have never read of his. I look forward to going into season 3 and then on to whatever Matt and Scott decide to do next." Well, that's wonderful. You might not catch up to us at the end of season 3, but maybe you'll catch up to us in the middle of Flanagan's Wake, which, Matt, I'm getting really excited about. I started like ordering the movies I need to order to make sure we have them for Flanagan's Wake, and it's gonna be good times for sure.
Awesome. So excited.
Thank you so much, Zarkara, and thank you to everyone who continues to send those reviews in. They really do mean a lot. We also continue to get emails from people that have found the show or just catching up with the show and enjoying it. And we please keep sending those in. We love to read them. I try to respond to them as they come in, but I fall behind sometimes. But we really appreciate you taking the time to reach out to us. You really do very often make our day when we get stuff like this. So please reach out. We love hearing from y'all. Absolutely.
Yep. Thanks.
All right, folks. That's it for our very first episode of Fairy Tale. Next week, we continue with more, hopefully shorter, long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.